Audiobook by Fate's Reader. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel for more epic series. Drop your recommended novel below. We love to know what you want to hear next. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 631, Meeting First Ancestor Again. I'm imagining founding emperor to be a great hero, a person who is able to save the people from disasters. I imagine this old ancestor would be able to follow the people who believed in him to their deaths. I thought he would be that person I imagined. But he isn't. Inside disabled elderly village of great ruins, Qianmu sat beside the bonfire and looked at the water boiling in the pot. His expression was calm as he said, "The more history I uncovered, the more I felt he isn't worthy to become founding emperor. He isn't worthy of being the leader of tens of thousands of heroes. Maybe he is only an old man that has been scared out of his wits and only thinks of living his life peacefully. He doesn't have the spirit worthy of making those heroes look up to him." "Cluck!" a hen dragon beside him said while nodding its head seriously. "You are right." Qianmu added some firewood, his expression becoming slightly sorrowful. If he had that kind of aspiration and boldness, why did he suddenly retreat in the final battle? Why did he abandon his old brothers and comrades without a care, leaving the people to suffer from the disaster? If he is truly the hero I have imagined, what has he done over these 20,000 years? Nothing. The hen dragon nodded its head and said solemnly, "Cluck, cluck." He did nothing. No wonder all those that followed him would feel disappointed. Qianmu burst into laughter. He then shook his head. "How I wish to return to Carefree Village, to turn his comfortable niche upside down, to interrogate him personally. Maybe I can fix Permitha Ark and drive this ship to find him there. I still have a mirror that village chief has found from Permitha, Arkansas. The path to Carefree Village is recorded in it. Village chief said that I can only head to Carefree Village after I can break the seal he placed on the mirror." "Cluck?" the hen dragon asked in doubt. "You are so nice, listening to me talk so much rubbish." Qianmu gradually turned his head over to look at it, slowly pulling out a sword. He said gently, "However, you know too much of my secrets. Don't struggle. Only a cooked hen dragon is a hen dragon that cannot spew secrets. Don't be a hen dragon in your next lifetime." Disabled elderly village was in a panic as the hen dragons all flocked into one bunch. They looked at Qianmu boiling the chicken in horror. Not long after, Qianmu was satisfied after eating his fill. He drank the chicken soup and ate the chicken meat that was cooked to perfection. Grandpa Blind and the rest didn't return here, so they have gone to Fengdu to visit village chief. This place is not far from border Dragon City. I can go into between life and death to enter Fengdu, but before that, I'll pay my respects to village chief first and let him know I'm coming to visit him. He got up and left. Not long after, he came to that little mountain village in his memory. There were originally a few families in this little mountain village, and they had relied on village chief's stone statue. When Qianmu arrived, he was slightly stunned. There were a few more stone statues and village chief's stone statue had disappeared. "You mean that stone statue without any limbs? It got moved away." The villagers came to tell him, "Some weird people came here. There was a blacksmith, a butcher, a medicine peddler, a man selling spring festival couplets and paintings. They said the stone statue is an old friend of theirs. After they moved a few stone statues over here for us, they took the statue away. The original stone statue is still the best. You only need to give offerings to the original one and it would frequently make its presence felt. These new stone statues don't really have a presence." "That's right. There's also an old thief among those weird people, and he stole the dried pork I was hanging outside my house." Qianmu was surprised. Grandpa Mute and the rest were here. Why did they move village chief's stone statue away? His eyes suddenly shone brightly. "That's right. It must be Grandpa Apothecary trying to summon back the soul of village chief. They're trying to see if village chief could be revived." He couldn't help but feel excited as he immediately took his leave, heading straight for Border Dragon City. Border Dragon City. This city had already become an important sacred ground for business. After a few years since he last came to this place, the level of prosperity had already surpassed Qianmu's imagination. Goods from all over the country were gathering right here. Flying ships sailed to and fro. They were concentrated in numbers, and there were ships unloading cargo everywhere. The merchants of East Earth and West Earth were all trading here. It was very convenient for them, as this saved them the trouble of going all the way to Eternal Peace and West Earth. Other than Border Dragon City, the other cities in Great Ruins were also starting to prosper. The booming trade industry also brought along more schools and academies. Therefore, every city in Great Ruins had a lot of schools. The people of Great Ruins were considered the scholars there, and they learned divine arts. There were even all kinds of strange beasts, morphing into their human forms, that enrolled themselves in the schools to seek knowledge. Qin Mu came to between life and death and saw that this place was still very lively. Many scholars would spend money just to enter Fengdu from here. The one that guarded between life and death was an incense master of Heavenly Saint cult. So Qin Mu naturally didn't need to spend money to enter. He rowed the boat and floated into Yudu on the long river. He leaped up when he reached the bottom of the bridge and landed on it. When Qin Mu came down from the bridge, he had already transformed into a skeleton. Human Emperor Qin. Qin Mu looked towards the source of the voice. He saw the 5-feet-tall human Emperor Ishan squeezing his way over among the ghosts and breaking into a smile. "It is you. When I saw your skeleton, I recognized you immediately." Qin Mu hurriedly greeted, "Great Grandmaster." Human Emperor Ishan asked in an alert tone, "Why have you come to Fengdu? Are you thinking of beating your ancestors again? Are you going to stand up for little Su?" Qin Mu shook his head and said, "I'm here to see village chief." Human Emperor Ishan let out a sigh of relief. He turned his head and waved at the rest who were popping their heads out from the corner of the street. "He's not here to beat us. Come out." Human Emperor Qikong, Human Emperor Lanpe, and the rest of the people walked out from the corner of the street. Human Emperor Qikong asked in a loud voice, "Human Emperor Qin, did that little brat Su Muja complain to you?" Qin Mu asked bewilderedly, "Village chief complaining to me?" Everyone looked at each other, revealing a strange smile. They snickered and didn't mention it. Qin Mu asked suspiciously, "What happened? Why is village chief beaten? How did he provoke seniors?" Fifth ancestor Human Emperor snickered and said with a smile, "Su Muja, that brat, is not in Fengdu. He's all smug now since he got revived by Bronze Face. He said he was going to Supreme Emperor Heaven to find you. A few months ago, some weird people came to find him and they chitter-chattered for quite a while. One of the weird people with a bronze face said he still could be saved. Bird God Chi Shio also said that Brat Su was a half-alive and half-dead person that still has the smell of a living person. That's why Bronze Face allowed Brat Su to return to his body and revived him." Qin Mu blinked and said with a smile, "So I see. Bronze Face is Grandpa Apothecary of our village. His medical expertise is #1 in the world. His medical expertise is even higher than mine. If he treated him personally, village chief will definitely be fine. That being said, why did ancestors want to beat up village chief?" Human Emperor Qikong quickly went over the topic. "This rascal lied to us and made you beat us up, throwing our faces." He then came running back nonchalantly, saying how he discovered records of the Overlord body. "If we don't beat him, who do we beat? What a disciple I have taken in to even scheme at me. Beating him once was too light for him, so we beat him every day. Every day." Qin Mu's face darkened and said gently, "Ancestors, Junior has learned more abilities outside. I would like ancestors to give me pointers." The expressions of all the human emperors changed and they started finding excuses. "A few days ago, someone had burned and offered a set of clothes for me. The craftsmanship is not bad. I forgot to wear it today and flaunt it to everyone. There are some people who heard I'm a human emperor and gave me offerings. Someone burned a few paper maidens for me. Someone must have remembered us in the world of the living. Old Ling, I heard Emperor Yanfeng had scaled up the Temple of Heaven to worship the ancestors. He continued the family register, making a connection to you and saying he's your descendant. Those maidens might be from the Emperor's offerings for you." Qin Mu also didn't really want to beat them. He said with a smile, "Ancestors, I'm here this time to find Village Chief. Since Village Chief is not here. Before he even finished speaking, his aura trembled violently when he saw what was at the end of the street. The human emperors around him also detected the change in his aura. They looked towards the end of the street as well. They only saw a young human emperor standing there and looking at Qin Mu silently. Second Ancestor Human Emperor's heart tightened, and he hurriedly said with a smile, "Human Emperor Qin haven't met First Ancestor before, right? Let me introduce you to him. First Ancestor, this is Human Emperor Qin, the current Human Emperor. He specially came over to visit us. Your Between Life and Death is set up by him to connect the world of the dead and the world of the living. He's very creative, right? Human Emperor Qin, come quickly and pay your respects to First Ancestor." "There's no need." Qin Mu raised his hand as he said indifferently, "Second Ancestor, your skeleton was crushed by him and your grave was pushed down by him. You wouldn't have not known. You know what he had done clearer than me." Second Ancestor was slightly stunned and he opened his mouth. However, he was speechless. First Ancestor Human Emperor walked over and said indifferently, "Since you are here." "That's right. Since you are already here." Qin Mu gently raised his hand and took down the golden willow leaf on his forehead. He was originally a skeleton in Fengdu, but now his flesh and blood were actually returning to his body at a speed which the naked eye could see. His body was quickly recovered. Qin Mu's hands and legs trembled. "I shall beat you to death before I go." All of the human emperors were stunned. At the moment, Qin Mu was not at between life and death, but he had recovered his corporeal body and he wasn't restricted by Fengdu's rules. This was something that was impossible. They didn't know Qin Mu was born in Yudu, and Fengdu was a part of Yudu. In the past, he was restricted by Fengdu's rules and would transform into a skeleton whenever he entered. Now with his third eye opened, his identity and bloodline as son of Yudu were partially awakened. When the third eye appeared, he could have a body of flesh and blood. Qin Mu's gaze focused on First Ancestor Human Emperor who was walking over. Waves were surging in his heart. Outside Hall of Human Emperor, he was defeated by First Ancestor Human Emperor's hands, and he looked at him destroy the blood and sweat of all the past human emperors. He saw him crush Second Ancestor's skeleton and shatter his tombstone. Qin Mu had suffered his greatest setback in his life. This setback made him depressed for several months. He had no choice but to risk entering Supreme Emperor Heaven, seeking cultivation methods of a higher level, to comprehend techniques that could defeat First Ancestor Human Emperor. His Calamity Sword, his technique entering the path. They had all undergone breakthroughs from the pressure of this person. The strongest enemy in his heart wasn't the devil race of Supreme Emperor Heaven or the celestial heavens that was high above. It was this man in front of him, the founder of Hall of Human Emperors, the person who he respected and had shattered his dreams. First Ancestor's expression was calm. "Here? This place isn't good. You will damage Fengdu and it won't be easy to answer to King Yama. Go to Hall of Human Emperors. After I defeat you, I shall destroy the skeleton of another human emperor." Qin Mu turned around and walked out of Fengdu with a dark face. "Wait for me in Hall of Human Emperors." Second Ancestor saw Qin Mu off. When he turned around, he noticed that First Ancestor Human Emperor had also vanished. First Ancestor Human Emperor originally wasn't dead. He had only petrified his corporeal body and entered Fengdu to hide in seclusion. He could come and go freely on a whim. His primordial spirit had remarkable abilities. His speed was so fast that he was probably already back in his corporeal body. "What do we do now?" The human emperors looked at Second Ancestor and they said, "They will definitely fight again once they reach there. No doubt that we will be the ones who will suffer." Third Ancestor Human Emperor had a bitter face. "After Human Emperor Qin loses this time, my skeleton will be the one that will be crushed." The other human emperors were also frowning. Raising himself up to the standard where he could defeat First Ancestor Human Emperor on the same realm was simply too difficult. They were all outstanding people in their own generation. Even though there were constraints in their era and they couldn't cultivate to the peak, everyone had their own god-level attainments. However, all aspects of First Ancestor Human Emperor were on the level of God, and perhaps even higher. It was not even a year since Qin Mu was defeated by first ancestor human emperor. No matter how fast his abilities grew, it was at most some rays in his cultivation realm. Just the rays of cultivation realm wasn't enough to defeat first ancestor. It wasn't hard for divine arts practitioners to raise their realm, but if they wanted to raise their foundation, that would be way too difficult. A raise in the realm was merely building floors on top of a building, while a raise in the foundation was strengthening and expanding the base of the building without damaging the structure that was already built on it, allowing oneself to store even more buildings and to make the buildings even taller. The difficulty of achieving this could be well imagined. Only a raise in the foundation could allow Qin Mu to have a chance to defeat first ancestor on the same realm. This required him to have his knowledge and foundation being raised to the level of first ancestor human emperor. How old is human emperor Qin? Second ancestor suddenly asked. Human emperor Qi Kong thought for a moment and said, Bratsu mentioned his age before. According to the world of the living, he should be 19. Second ancestor said, 19, a youth that's full of youthful energy. A person's success of a lifetime usually begins from this age. How old were you guys when your techniques and divine arts were determined initially? Third ancestor pondered and said, Old man, when you took me in as your disciple, I was 12. When I was 20, I created the mold for Yin Yang Heaven Flipping Hands. I also had an idea for my technique, Secrets of Yin Yang 9 Great Creeds. I then spent the rest of the several hundred years to finally perfect these two. Fourth ancestor said, I didn't cultivate teacher's technique and mudra skills. He is a failure, so I will only fail if I learn from him. Because of this, I created my own technique and divine arts. I'm much better than old man. I had my ideas for my technique when I was 17 and managed to beat old man during my middle age. Third ancestor blew on his mustache and stared at him. Do you think you are so remarkable for defeating me? Fourth ancestor said with a face full of smiles. That's right. I'm very remarkable. The other human emperors also said the age where they had confirmed their techniques and divine arts. They were mostly between over 10 years old and 35 years old. They had already determined where their life was headed, and only human emperor Tuoyu and sixth ancestor were the late bloomers. Human emperor Qin is already 19 years old. In that case, he is currently at his peak of creation. Second ancestor human emperor pondered and said, Maybe his technique has its own path already and his divine arts already has an embryonic form. Maybe he won't be defeated by first ancestor again. If he gets defeated again, the blow will be too huge for him. Human emperor Lanpa said, When the technique and divine arts have an embryonic form, will he have a chance to defeat first ancestor? The technique and divine arts of first ancestor human emperor aren't in their embryonic stages. They are already perfected to a flawless stage. All of the human emperors fell silent. But he's the overlord body. Human emperor Qikong was slightly fearful. The overlord body should be very powerful, right? My disciple Su Muja, that rascal, is always gloating that his disciple is the overlord body. He almost brags his way up to heaven already. Everyone nodded their heads. Even the overlord body needs to grow. How much can he grow at 19 years old? After a moment, second ancestor firmly said, Let us materialize and go to Hall of Human Emperors. Human Emperor Qin is traveling by the world of the living and he still needs 1 to 2 days to get there. We can reach there a step earlier, and we can all go and beat up first ancestor together. Good. Let's beat up first ancestor together. We need to beat him until he admits defeat and not dare to fight with human Emperor Qin. The human emperors were all excited as they nodded their heads. They all turned invisible and vanished from Fengdu. Bird god Qi Xiu looked at the human emperors vanishing away. He turned his head to look at King Yama beside him. King Yama ain't going to stop them? They are all dead people. So won't they be breaking our Fengdu's rules if they just head to the world of the living recklessly like this? There's no need. King Yama shook his head. Hall of Human Emperors doesn't belong to the world of the living, and it also doesn't belong to the world of the dead. That place is not under our jurisdiction. The past human emperors are a bunch of fellows that aren't afraid of heaven or earth. Their decision to go to Hall of Human Emperors is not something my Fengdu can have jurisdiction over. Qi Xiu was stunned. Hall of Human Emperors doesn't belong to the world of the living nor the world of the dead? Hall of Human Emperors is a shattered piece of founding Emperor Celestial Heavens. Fengdu can't touch that place. King Yama pulled back his gaze and turned around to leave. The biggest piece of founding Emperor Celestial Heavens landed and transformed into great ruins. There are also some broken pieces that are of utmost importance. For example, the 32 celestial palaces and the 72 throne halls. Our Fengdu cannot touch these places. Hall of Human Emperors is located in one of the celestial palaces called Jade Brightness Palace. They have gone there and my magic power can't reach there to pull them back. The reason why our Fengdu can suppress this piece of Yudu is also because there's a celestial palace hidden in Fengdu. It's called Sand Border Palace. Therefore, it can suppress the ghosts. Outside Border Dragon City, Qin Mu rode the clouds and executed Human Emperor's seal, following the markings towards Hall of Human Emperors. Just as he left, a 3-headed and 6-armed god and a youth appeared in Border Dragon City. They were none other than Qi Shi and Pan Gongzhou. Why does old teacher want to see the local customs of eternal peace? Pan Gongzhou was puzzled. We are finally back from Supreme Emperor Heaven after so much effort. So why can't we go to South Earth directly? South Earth has already sunk and became South Sea. It has sunk underwater for 30,000 years. Even if I go now or later, it will always be there. Since I'm already back in my homeland, there's no need to hurry. The 3 heads of Qi Shi looked around and he said calmly, I'm here to see the local customs of eternal peace. I want to see the potential of this era and see if they have the capital to fight with the celestial heavens. What has teacher seen? Pan Gongzhou asked. It has the look of great prosperity, but it's still not enough. Qi Shi continued. The eternal peace now can be wiped out with a breath. They cannot even stand up to one blow. Disaster will strike soon. The paths, skills, and divine arts of eternal peace are progressing at a godly speed. However, the time is too short and the strong practitioners are too few. They are merely relying on the remaining survivors of Founding Emperor era to survive until now. Founding Emperor era is only dead and not yet vanquished, but in the end, they are still dead. They can't protect eternal peace for a long time. Therefore, eternal peace is definitely going to be wiped out. There's no need to see anymore. Let's go. Pan Gongzhou was bewildered. He didn't know how he had seen all of these. Qi Shi had already walked far away and he immediately hurried to catch up to him. Qin Mu was in a hurry to head to Hall of Human Emperors, so he missed Qi Shi and Pan Gongzhou at just the right moment. As he walked, he executed Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique, and the divine treasures of both God Path and Devil Path operated in his body. His vital qi became more and more vigorous. When he was in Supreme Brightness Heaven, he had merged his 6 directions Divine Treasure and 7 stars Divine Treasure into one. At this point, he had already reached a crucial period. His vital qi cultivation became even denser. Also, the wall between the 2 divine treasures gradually became more and more blurry. However, he still didn't put in as much effort in his devil path, so he was still lacking some experience. 2 days later, Qin Mu finally arrived at Hall of Human Emperors. Human Emperor's seal shone on the door. After a moment, the door opened and he walked in. In front of his eyes was boundless fog and tombstones among the fog. The land seemed endless and graves littered everywhere. Qin Mu didn't seem to notice. He continued walking towards Hall of Human Emperor. In front of him, traces from battles were left behind. Human Emperor Qi Kang's primordial spirit was struggling in a big pit. He was like a black carrot that was planted outside, and only his head was visible. Human Emperor Qin, don't walk forward anymore. Human Emperor Qi Kang's primordial spirit was trapped and he couldn't move. He cried out, I couldn't defeat him and got wrecked by him. The other human emperors also got wrecked. Qin Mu paid no attention to him and continued to walk forward. In the past, the primordial spirit of human Emperor Ishan was sprawled out. He laid on the ground with blank eyes and would twitch from time to time. Human Emperor Ishan moved his fat head with difficulty. His neck was even thicker than his head. He panted heavily. "Don't go, he's too fierce." Qin Mu took a step forward, with dense god and devil aura around his body. He took down the 2 Taotai sacks from his waist and threw it on the ground. Not far away, human Emperor Lan Po's primordial spirit was hanging on the tombstone. She raised her head with difficulty. "You can't defeat him. His abilities are too terrifying." Qin Mu took out his sword pellet and threw it on the ground. Human Emperor Tuoyu grabbed his leg and raised his head. "Don't go." All of us human emperors jumped at him at the same time, but we still couldn't defeat him. He only used Divine Bridge Realm and his primordial spirit to beat all of us. Qin Mu continued to head forward, dragging human Emperor Tuoyu's primordial spirit for several steps. He could only let his hands go. On the road ahead, the primordial spirits of the rest of the human emperors were all on the ground, unable to get up no matter how much they struggle. Qin Mu had a stupefied look as he came to the straw hut of the past human emperors. He looked forward and only saw First Ancestor standing there quietly in front of the hall, waiting for him to arrive. Qin Mu roused his vital qi and booming sounds rang out beside his ears. In the midst of the loud boom, the 6 Directions Divine Treasure and his 7 Stars Divine Treasure of the Devil Path finally combined and merged into one. First Ancestor Human Emperor said indifferently, "You only came to find me after a year. You make me disappointed. Make your move. Let me see your improvement over this past year. I didn't destroy their bones because I'm waiting for you to come. I shall defeat you first before destroying these useless people." Boom! Qin Mu's vital qi suddenly became incomparably intense and violent. He exerted force in both of his legs and his body nearly vanished in an instant. He appeared in front of First Ancestor Human Emperor with a blink of an eye. Before First Ancestor Human Emperor even finished his words and the astonishment even appear on his face, Qin Mu's fists had already struck him heavily on his face. Behind Qin Mu's body, a volcano erupted and flames rushed into the sky. The divine art he used was Human Emperor Qi Kang's ultimate art. His magic power burst out like an explosion in an instant. First Ancestor Human Emperor's figure was blown backward and he smashed on the wall of Hall of Human Emperors with a loud boom. Qin Mu rushed in and his hands overlapped each other as he used Yin Yang heavenly flipping hands. At the same time, his palms filled the sky as though he was a 1,000-armed Buddha. Old Ma's thunderclap 8 strikes. The 2 Madra skills were executed out at the same time and countless overlapping hands struck out at the same time. The entire Hall of Human Emperors trembled violently and the back wall just crumbled. First Ancestor Human Emperor flew backward. Qin Mu lowered his head and he shot forward like a hurricane. The violent vital qi transformed into a Milky Way hanging down and caused First Ancestor Human Emperor's body to tumble endlessly from the impact. Improvement? Come and take a look for yourself. Great overarching heavenly stars appeared behind him and transformed into a force field. He struck out with a Madra. The stars instantly blazed and countless starlights linked with one another, transforming into a palm force with huge power and compressing the air for dozens of miles. The palm force smashed into First Ancestor Human Emperor's body. "Look at how I use their moves to see if I can beat you to death." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 633, Qin Mu's Disdain. First Ancestor tumbled and crashed into the depths of this vast space. He vanished into the fog. What followed next was a light shining out from the fog. It was the pupil light from his eyes. The last time they fought, he had once used his divine eyes to nail Qin Mu to the wall of Hall of Human Emperors, nearly snapping Qin Mu's waist into half. The third eye on the heart of Qin Mu's brows was tightly shut and didn't open. Countless formation markings swirled in his eyes and 2 beams of light shot out, clashing towards the gaze. The gaze of First Ancestor Human Emperor shone over and both of their pupil divine arts clashed. Incomparably intense light burst forth. It was like 2 small suns that had shone dozens of miles in all directions, driving away the fog. First Ancestor's divine art was still more exquisite than Qin Mu's as the divine light from his eyes immediately suppressed his 9 heavens divine eyes. First Ancestor Human Emperor roared and his hair fluttered in the wind. He raised both of his hands and star clouds appeared in the sky. Countless huge meteors were about to fall from the sky. The third eye on the heart of Qin Mu's brows opened up. He said with a soft voice, "This is the second time I have unleashed my full power." Suddenly, the divine treasures of his God Path and Devil Path revolved around each other. The vital chi of the God Path and the Devil Path flowed together, fusing together under his third eye. His cultivation had literally doubled. He heard a hum as his gaze just crushed First Ancestor Human Emperor's pupil divine art straightaway. That pair of gaze struck First Ancestor Human Emperor and nailed him to the ground ruthlessly. First Ancestor's divine art also crumbled immediately as the star clouds in the sky vanished. The meteors falling from the sky also vanished. Qin Mu's gaze nailed him firmly to the ground, causing his bones to give off snapping sounds. Suddenly, the vital chi around First Ancestor Human Emperor transformed into countless runes, turning into a formation. Teleportation divine art? Divine light pulled back into Qin Mu's eyes. The runes around his body jumped around, quickly calculating the location where First Ancestor Human Emperor was teleporting to. The vital chi in his hand transformed into an incomparably fine sword light. Countless sword lights gathered and transformed into a treasured sword in his hand. Swinging the sword like wind, he precisely blocked the Madra skill of First Ancestor Human Emperor who was about to appear. First Ancestor's figure finally appeared. With one Madra as heaven and another as earth, he was the Lord of heaven and earth. In terms of attainments in Madra skills, he even surpassed Third Ancestor Human Emperor's Yin-Yang Heaven Flipping Hands. Third Ancestor's Yin-Yang Heaven Flipping Hands was actually an inspiration from First Ancestor. However, Third Ancestor took the path of Yin and Yang, the 9 Great Creeds, 19 steps in length and breadth, 361 footwork, and 361 Madra skills. Back then, during Third Ancestor Human Emperor's generation, Third Ancestor Human Emperor was invincible with 19 steps in all directions. Smashing the unbeatable legend of Third Ancestor Human Emperor was his disciple, Fourth Ancestor Human Emperor. He created his own 10 crossings of law technique and had beaten the old man up miserably. Meanwhile, First Ancestor Human Emperor's technique was a level higher. With Heaven Madra and Earth Madra, he was respected between heaven and earth. Third Ancestor Human Emperor could only achieve 19 steps in all directions, while his Madra stretched throughout heaven and earth. Yet his Madra skill had met Qin Mu's sword. Qin Mu didn't make use of his sword pellet. Fighting First Ancestor Human Emperor this time, he didn't use any spirit weapons. He even threw his Taotai sacks on the ground. He wanted to defeat this army deserter of founding emperor era with his true abilities. He wanted to defeat this person who had destroyed a lifetime's hard work of these human emperors. He wanted to step on this scoundrel who had insulted the techniques of past human emperors. He wanted to destroy all his glory and step on his pride. His sword light was an unrivaled sword. It was simply beyond compare. With a jolt of his hand, he executed Calamity of High Emperor. Boundless Calamity Air connected heaven and earth to split the sky and rend the earth. This was Village Chief's sword skill. As the previous human emperor, Village Chief's attainments in sword skill surpassed the past human emperors by leaps. In Fengdu, Village Chief got ganged up on, but not a single human emperor dared to fight him one-on-one. That was because Village Chief had caught up to the reform in his old age, so his sword skill had improved one more step. If it was a one-on-one fight, other than First Ancestor, no one was a match for him. In Qin Mu's hands, he had incorporated the 18th sword form into Calamity of High Emperor, having a total of 18 basic sword moves. Compared to Village Chief's sword skill, he still couldn't achieve perfection. However, this sword skill was even more powerful in his hands. His magic power was incomparably dense. Not to mention the other divine arts practitioners on the same realm, there weren't much great experts on celestial being realm that could even surpass him. Qin Mu's magic power burst forth. His sword light sliced the power of the Heaven Madra and Earth Madra, breaking the legend of First Ancestor being invincible under heaven and earth. First Ancestor Human Emperor had no choice but to change his move. There was clearly a flaw in Qin Mu's sword skill, but First Ancestor Human Emperor couldn't break in. That was because Qin Mu's magic power was too dense, and he could use his terrifying vital chi to make up for his openings. As he wielded a sword in one hand, his body moved like a dragon. No matter how strong first ancestor human emperor's Madras skill was, Qin Mu just broke them all with Calamity of High Emperor. He was even too lazy to transform his move. Pull me out! Pull me out! In front of Hall of Human Emperors, Human Emperor Ishan struggled to crawl out from the ground. He wanted to go into Hall of Human Emperors to see the situation. Human Emperor Qikong behind him frantically said, "I got trapped by first ancestor's Madras skill." Human Emperor Lanpa and the rest struggled to get up. Once they were back on their feet, they surrounded Human Emperor Qikong and struck the land surrounding him. Finally, they broke first ancestor's Madras skill together and saved him. With the human emperors holding on to each other, they finally passed through the Hall of Human Emperors that had been smashed through. As soon as the human emperors arrived at the back of the hall, all of them had a dazed look as they saw two figures moving quickly in the fog. First ancestor human emperor had a Madra as heaven, and there was a power like the heaven was crashing down. With another Madra as earth, the ground was trembling and the mountains were shaking. His body was like a pillar that supported heaven and earth from falling apart. This kind of Madras skill was a marvelous divine art that could only be created after reaching extremely high attainments in Madra entering the path. First ancestor human emperor's Madras skill contained his frame of mind. In the final years of founding emperor era, the heaven was falling and the earth was rending. Founding emperor celestial heavens was approaching a crisis. He was also a person who had experienced that sorrowful era and wanted to save the entire skyscraper with his strength alone. His heaven and earth Madras skills brought out an intense feeling that was beyond comparison within him, letting heaven and earth run amok. However, as the pillar that supported heaven and earth, he would always be steadfastly standing between them. This was probably what he was thinking in his heart. He was a person that had experienced that tragic era. That era was deeply imprinted in his Madras skill. His Madras skill could borrow the power of heaven falling. Likewise, it could also borrow the power of earth rending. Therefore, his power was supreme and boundless. This was the reason why all the past human emperors couldn't be on a par with him. Even though the past human emperors all held heavy responsibilities, they had never experienced a tragic time like first ancestor human emperor did. They didn't have to witness the collapse of a majestic celestial heavens, witness his clansmen and comrades dying miserably, and witness the passage of time burying those glorious years. Only having this kind of experience could he have this kind of frame of mind. Only then could he create such a technique and divine art. On the other hand, the past human emperors didn't have this kind of experience and frame of mind, thus the techniques and divine arts they had created were naturally inferior. The human emperors met each other's eyes, their hearts full of wonder and shock. Even when first ancestor was facing off Qin Mu, he had no choice but to stay in a defensive position. He was truly in a disadvantageous position. Even though Qin Mu's sword skill still had the shadows of Village Chief, Dao Sex Dao Sword, and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, his sword skill already had the momentum of jumping out of Village Chief, Dao Sword, and Imperial Preceptor's influences. The mood that was in his sword skill was different from the mood that was in first ancestor's Madras skill. His sword skills didn't have Village Chief's melancholy of remembering the olden times, Dao Sword's ingenious way of calculation, and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's wisdom of thinking about the whole world and planning strategies. However, his sword skill was like a blazing fire sweeping through the prairie. His sword skill was like the spring wind brushing across the desolate plains that were filled with vigor and fighting spirit. His sword skill seemed to be trying to cut down all devil miasma and degenerates. It had a great resolution to get rid of the old and support the new. Like a blazing fire on boiling oil, it had the great willpower to work ambitiously for prosperity. His sword skill seemed to have another kind of mind-blowing resolution. It was the frame of mind brought from another era. It was a completely different era from the era that was full of disasters and sorrow. It had the drive to improve, sweeping the entire world with reform using superior fighting spirit. First ancestor human emperor and Qin Mu were people from different eras. Each had a different kind of divine arts. One was a Madras skill while the other one was a sword skill. Both of them were separately imprinted with the traces of different eras. Strictly speaking, it was hard to say which was higher and which was lower based on the meaning that had been established. However, based on their frame of mind, one showed acute determination in pushing forward with high fighting spirit, while the other was sunk in remembering his past defeat. From this perspective, victory and defeat were clearly determined. Not only that, the most terrifying point was that Qin Mu's power was simply too dense. He suppressed First Ancestor Human Emperor's Madras skill and just destroyed that powerful Madras skill like they were decayed branches. Qin Mu fought more and more fiercely. As he slashed over with his sword, he had this great urge to sever First Ancestor Human Emperor, this pillar that supported heaven and earth. He forced First Ancestor to have no choice but to execute his teleportation divine art repeatedly. He's truly the overlord body, Human Emperor Qi Kong muttered. Second Ancestor said dejectedly, "There's truly an overlord body in this world. I originally thought Human Emperor Qin had only relied on hard work to reach where he is. Never did I truly expect him to be the overlord body of the legends. This vital Qi, it's simply too crazy." The other human emperors also nodded their heads. If he wasn't an overlord body, it was truly difficult to explain the sight they were seeing. When all of them ganged up on First Ancestor, they suffered a miserable defeat. First Ancestor Human Emperor had knocked them down on the same realm. Now, on the same realm, Qin Mu was actually pressuring and beating up First Ancestor. Only an overlord body could achieve such a feat, right? Su Muzha, that brat, really deserves those beatings. Human Emperor Qi Kong sighed ruefully. The other human emperors also shared the same sentiments. First Ancestor still has a finishing blow he had not used. Second Ancestor suddenly said, "He executed it once before. I have seen it. It's 3 extremely terrifying Madras skills." Fourth Ancestor hurriedly said, "How terrifying are they? The heaven will fall and the earth will rend. 3 forms of overturning heaven." Second Ancestor looked at the fight between Qin Mu and First Ancestor. He could only see numerous sword wounds on First Ancestor that were inflicted by Qin Mu. For Qin Mu to have injured him to this extent, he should be proud. 3 forms of overturning heaven is his divine art that had entered the path. I wanted to learn it once, but these 3 Madras skills contain strong thoughts of self-destruction. I'm afraid that after learning it, I would die after executing all 3 moves. Second Ancestor let out a shaky breath and muttered under his breath, "I hope he doesn't use it." Right at this moment, heaven and earth changed. The firmament cracked open and heavenly stars fell like rain. The sky was scorched red-hot and the ground fissured as volcanoes rose everywhere. All kinds of natural disasters came pouring in. First Ancestor finally couldn't hold himself back and used the first form of 3 forms of overturning heaven. At this moment, Qin Mu pointed at the heart of his brows. A beam of sword light shot out from his third eye. 10 miles of sword light shone brilliantly as it flashed by in an instant, nailing First Ancestor Human Emperor before his 3 forms of overturning heaven could even burst forth with its power. First Ancestor was blown backward with the sword for 10 miles and got nailed on a huge mountain. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 634, 20,000 Years of Imparting Heart's Blood. First Ancestor was in a slight daze. It seemed as though he still hasn't recovered from the series of attacks Qin Mu had given him. However, Second Ancestor and the rest knew that he was acting like that because Qin Mu didn't want to learn his technique and divine arts. Simply put, First Ancestor was wondering at Qin Mu's rejection. His original intention was to motivate Qin Mu and let him discover more of his potential before teaching his own technique and divine arts to him. Qin Mu was indeed motivated by him and risked his life to transfer himself into Supreme Emperor Heaven. He went through hardships and escaped death several times. Qin Mu's technique finally entered the path, and this allowed him to have the ability to be a match for him on the same realm. If it was anyone else, they would all find it difficult to return from Supreme Emperor Heaven alive. The dangers within were simply beyond anyone's imagination. However, after Qin Mu had invested so much, he only used a phrase "not worth my time" to reject his technique and divine arts. Was he in disdain of learning his techniques and divine arts? Or was he in disdain of how he had conducted himself and handled affairs? Maybe it was both? The past human emperors looked at each other before finally looking at second ancestor. They all stretched their fingers out and poked him in the waist. Second ancestor human emperor walked forward unwillingly. Without giving a damn, he said, "Old man, bah! You look even younger than me. Master, human emperor Qin has his own pride. If you didn't destroy our blood, sweat, and tears, and crushed my skeleton and tombstone, he wouldn't have acted that way to you. Stop being full of remorse. If he doesn't want to learn, you can teach them to me." First ancestor human emperor gave him a look and shook his head. "I gave you 800 years, yet you could never learn it. I have already lost hope for you. I feel human emperor Qin, who has the overlord body, would at most take a few months to learn it." Second ancestor human emperor turned and walked back furiously. "How insulting. I'm not going to persuade him anymore. Anyone who likes to bother with him can go. With this attitude, he deserves to be beaten to death." The other human emperors looked at one another in dismay. First ancestor walked over. His earlier bewilderment and disappointment were all wiped away. "This is Jade Brightness Palace, one of the 36 palaces. Even though you are all human emperors, you have only come to its surroundings, which is the area of Hall of Human Emperors. Let me bring you all to the true Jade Brightness Palace. Follow me." All of the human emperors were puzzled. He was depressed a short while ago, and now he was going to bring them to Jade Brightness Palace. They really didn't know what first ancestor human emperor was thinking. However, first ancestor human emperor wasn't wrong. Even though they had frequently come to Hall of Human Emperors when they were still alive, they didn't know much about it. They could feel that the space of Hall of Human Emperors wasn't just limited to this land that they were seeing, but every time they tried to walk into the fog to explore, they would be brought back to the front of Hall of Human Emperors as they walked. Even if they flew or ran at full speed, it was the same result every single time. Hall of Human Emperors would just appear in front of them. No matter which direction they headed, it was always a loop. During that time, they realized that someone had used great magic power to fold up the space surrounding Hall of Human Emperors. That person didn't want to let others discover the secrets of Hall of Human Emperors, and this person could only be First Ancestor Human Emperor. First Ancestor Human Emperor definitely had his own reason for trying to hide Jade Brightness Palace, so what was the reason for him to open up the palace now? First Ancestor Human Emperor brought them to move forward. Jade Brightness Palace is not a place of high authority, however. It was also an extremely sacred place in founding Emperor Celestial Heavens. This is a place of education, and there are 4 heavenly teachers that took appointments here. Back then, when the calamity first broke out, I was seeking knowledge here. Second Ancestor thought for a moment and said, "Does one of the heavenly teachers have the appearance of a woodcutter?" Heavenly Saint Cult's founding master thinks that he is a saint. First Ancestor Human Emperor nodded. He is one of them. Back then, when the calamity broke out, he left Jade Brightness Palace to go to the front lines and develop strategies for the battle. After a change had happened in Jade Brightness Palace, he thought I had died. When he realized that I didn't join the battle and had escaped instead, he had ignored me ever since. A change happened in Jade Brightness Palace? All of the human emperors were curious. Third Ancestor Human Emperor asked, "First Ancestor, what was the change that had happened?" First Ancestor Human Emperor ignored his question. He continued leading them forward. Suddenly, the fog faded away and a magnificent sight appeared before their eyes. A community of celestial palaces was in front of them. There was row upon row of buildings every 5 steps, and row upon row of pavilions every 10 steps. Scenes of springtime were everywhere. The bright and beautiful buildings were like 16-year-old beauties, and the winding corridors of the palaces meandered like ribbons. The scent of books and papers wafted out from the doors, and they seemed to hear faint sounds of scholars reciting. The human emperors were bewildered. There seemed to be no signs of wars at all. There was not even a hint of destruction by any divine art. The palaces, buildings, pavilions, and pagodas were all incomparably fresh, as though they were recently constructed. There were no signs of corrosion over time. This was something that was impossible. Founding Emperor Celestial Heavens was already destroyed, and traces of war could also be seen outside Jade Brightness Palace. There were burnt lands and countless graves of gods that had died in battle. So how was this place untouched by the flames of war? First Ancestor Human Emperor didn't say a word. He led them forward and they passed by a huge hall. There were numerous praying mats in the hall, and young men and women were currently sitting inside. They raised their heads while looking forward, as though they were listening to a lecture. The hearts of all of the human emperors trembled violently. These young men and women looked vivid and lifelike, but they could see that they had already died for countless years. In front of the hall was a god that had the bearing of a scholar. He had one hand raised and a smile on his face, as though he was currently giving a lecture about the marvel of divine arts to the youths below him. This god was also a corpse and there was no breath from him at all. The corporeal bodies are not decomposed. What's going on? Human Emperor Qi Kong asked in a low and hoarse voice. No one replied to him. First Ancestor Human Emperor continued to walk forward and they followed him in a hurry. On the journey, they saw even stranger sights. Around the corner, they saw a little girl that had 2 ponytails, and she was fixed in a state of running. She was chasing after a black-colored divine hound, and that black hound seemed very mischievous. It led the little girl to chase it and even had a naughty glint in its eyes. The little girl had a smile on her face, as though she was clapping her hands and saying something. However, this little girl and this divine hound were both frozen in the past. They had both died in that instant, and their final actions had been preserved right before they died. All of the human emperors looked around as they became more and more shocked. Not far away, there was a god that had the appearance of a scholar, and in front of him stood a young maiden. The maiden was carrying several books in her arms while looking up to the scholar, as though she was asking the teacher some difficult question. There were also a few youths that were cultivating divine arts in the courtyard. 2 of the youths were currently in a duel. They had athletic postures and mudras were being formed under their hands. It seemed like they were executing a kind of mudra divine art. Beside them, a few youths stood. They were smiling and had their heads together, as though they were discussing who was stronger. All of the human emperors pulled back their gazes and suppressed the tremors in their hearts. They continued to follow First Ancestor. The more they saw, the more shocked they became. The time in this place seemed to have stopped. There was no sound at all. Everyone here seemed to be in suspended animation, maintaining their final action right before they died. Silence. Indescribable silence. It was a deadly silence that suffocated them. Those who had entered Jade Brightness Palace to learn are all outstanding talents among the younger generation of the Celestial Heavens. When the calamity broke out, the next generation of founding Emperor era were all destroyed in an instant. First Ancestor Human Emperor said with a blank expression. The person who had attacked this place had used the divine arts of Yudu. Only a single divine art erased all the hope of founding Emperor era. I had escaped by luck and I didn't even dare to look back. I fled in a panic. I thought my Tao heart was strong enough and no one could make me feel fear. However, when I saw so many friends, so many youths and gods dying, I crumbled there and then. All of the human emperors were silent. When facing such an abrupt change that was inconceivable, it was hard for anyone not to crumble. I escaped. I was at a loss. I felt panic and fear like a dog that had lost my family. First Ancestor Human Emperor said in a harsh tone. I encountered the army of the Celestial Heavens that had come to rescue us, but I was completely frightened. I didn't join them and I continued running. When I came back to my senses, I had nowhere to escape. Where could I go? Therefore, I turned back and found my way over. Then, his face became slightly contorted. The pain in his heart couldn't be imagined. He took a few heavy breaths. Then I saw their corpses. I was supposed to be fighting with them. I was supposed to die here with them. But I escaped. I lived on. But they are forever buried here. His shoulders trembled as he tried to suppress his tears. I lingered here and there was no more reason for me to live. I wanted to die with them. At that moment, I saw numerous races that were escaping for their lives. There were some divine arts practitioners that were helping a lot of ordinary people to evacuate, so I took them in and protected them until I could find a place for them to settle down. I searched for a long time. Finally, I found the place where the celestial heavens had landed. They were grateful to me, and these people that were exhausted from running used the last of their treasures to refine a human emperor's seal. They made a vow that every generation would remember what I've done, and will never dare or want to betray. However, they didn't know that I wasn't the human emperor that they wanted. I was just an army deserter that was scared out of my wits. He laughed at himself and shook his head. The circumstances created a hero, but I didn't want to become a hero. I didn't want to become a human emperor. They pushed me up to this position. Second ancestor said, "So afterwards, when you took me in as your disciple and threw the human emperor's seal to me, it's because you think you aren't worthy of this human emperor's seal?" First ancestor human emperor nodded his head. He came to the front of a 9-storied building and looked up at it. "This is Jade Brightness Pavilion. There are numerous techniques and divine arts of founding emperor era that are better than Supreme Emperor Heavens. All of you can go in and learn whatever you want." He then sat on the stone steps of Jade Brightness Pavilion with a sorrowful look. He looked at the familiar faces of people who had long died in front of Jade Brightness Pavilion. Even though 20,000 years had passed, he could still call out their names. Second ancestor human emperor and the rest didn't walk into Jade Brightness Pavilion. Instead, they looked at him. Suddenly, second ancestor asked in a bitter voice, "Master, since you have better techniques and divine arts, why didn't you impart them to me? Why didn't you impart them to the people of the world? Do you think those people that you had saved were all ordinary people? Poor people that are not worthy of the techniques here?" He couldn't help questioning him loudly as he sneered. "That's right, you are the human emperor that's revered by all of the races. We are just poor and ordinary people that you have saved. We can't be compared to your noble bloodline. You are a prince that's high above. We aren't worthy of your technique. If you wanted to impart, you would have done so 20,000 years ago, so why didn't you?" He couldn't hold back the bitterness in his heart. He raised his voice. "Did you know that after you left, I fought high heavens alone? I struggled to fight and almost died a few times in their hands. But all you have given me is that shitty seal. I held on because I felt I was the human emperor and I should be doing something for humanity. You could have taught me. You could have taught me." First ancestor was stupefied. Second ancestor pointed at the past human emperors and said furiously, "These people, they also inherited that shitty seal of yours. They gave up their dreams for you, to fight their entire lives and put all their effort into this. A lot of them never married, never had children, never had descendants. And all of that is because they were afraid the identity of human emperor would implicate their descendants. They were afraid that having a romance would hold them back from the responsibilities of a human emperor. But what about you? You've hidden yourself away your entire life and hid for 20,000 years. You have let us down." First ancestor human emperor's body trembled. He shook his head. "I can't impart. There's only a few people left from founding emperor era. If I impart to you, all of you will become a threat and will be wiped out." He raised his head, his eyes filling with tears. "If I imparted to you, I will be harming all of you. I can't." Second ancestor was stunned. After a while, he said bitterly, "Now that we're already dead and only our primordial spirits are left, what's the point of you imparting them to us now?" First ancestor buried his face in his elbows. He said in a hoarse voice, "There are a lot of corporeal bodies left in Jade Brightness Palace. They had died too fast, so their corporeal bodies are preserved. All of you can just possess them and revive yourselves. Human Emperor Qin needs you. Only he is worthy of becoming the human emperor. Go, go. Don't let me see you all." Second ancestor and the rest of the past human emperors fell into a daze. All of a sudden, second ancestor knelt down. "Teacher." The other human emperors also knelt down, and when they raised their heads, first ancestor human emperor had covered his face and left. "Will first ancestor be back?" Ishan asked. Second ancestor had heavy emotions in his heart as he said, "He might have seen hope on human Emperor Qin, but he doesn't want to see us possess his old friends. I don't know if he will be back." If he comes back and saw our faces, it might remind him of his old friends. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 635, Mutants of South Sea. When Qin Mu walked out of Hall of Human Emperors, the sky was dark. The stars above him twinkled as he let out a pent-up breath. He didn't leave immediately. Instead, he found a huge rock and sat on it. He fell into a daze. Even though he had finally let out his anger by beating up First Ancestor Human Emperor, there was still something gnawing away in his mind. Maybe if I beat him up once more, it can undo this thing that's gnawing at me. Even the orbit of the stars in this fake sky is slightly messed up. The gods controlling the aspect of the celestial bodies are becoming sloppier and sloppier. He stared with his eyes wide open. He looked at the messed up aspect of the celestial bodies as the eastern sky slowly lightened up. After a moment, the stars in the sky scattered in all directions like running horses. He thought to himself, Sun Sovereign controls the sun in the aspect of celestial bodies, but now that he was slain by Grandpa Butcher of our village, there is no one left to control the sun in the sky. The other gods must be panicking and scrambling. The stars in the sky were messy for a short while. When the sun rose up in the east, the sunlight covered up the messy aspect of the celestial bodies, so they no longer looked messed up. Qin Mu quietly sat on the rock and sneered at the stars that had just been concealed. When the sun rose up from the horizon, its path was also slightly crooked. Because of this, it looked like a kite that was being flown, swaying left and right from time to time. This kind of situation became apparent after the death of Sun Sovereign. The other gods that were controlling the sun now weren't too familiar with regards to how to control the sun. As a result, more mistakes could be spotted. Sun Sovereign went to Supreme Emperor Heaven with Qi Jui to find Qin Mu, only to meet Butcher, his old nemesis. As a result, he was slain by Butcher. After his death, there was no god that could control the sun formation in Eternal Peace's aspect of the celestial bodies. The sun should have been taken over by other gods, but since they weren't trained, mistakes were everywhere. Eternal Peace's aspect of the celestial bodies was formed by formations. It was the same for the sun, moon, and stars. The gods that were in charge of these formations definitely had their own responsibilities, so for them to suddenly take over Sun Sovereign's star diagram naturally made them flustered, and they couldn't handle the task immediately. Qin Mu saw the sun gradually rising in the sky. It finally stabilized, but it was still swaying left and right. The sunlight radiated in all directions to light up the southern border and South Sea in a variety of colors that were charming and dazzling. Suddenly, the gate of Hall of Human Emperors appeared once again, and First Ancestor Human Emperor walked out from inside. Qin Mu turned his head and looked at him before turning his head back to continue looking at the sunrise. First Ancestor Human Emperor hesitated for a moment. He didn't leave. Instead, he walked to the bottom of the rock and sat down. First Ancestor Human Emperor stared at the sun for a while and cried out, "This sun! It's unbearable to look at!" Qin Mu originally wanted to keep a straight face and ignore him, but he got amused by what he heard. Just bear with it. That Sun Sovereign who controls the formation of this sun had been slain by my Grandpa Butcher. I see. First Ancestor Human Emperor said, I've met that Sun Sovereign before. When the aspect of Eternal Peace's celestial bodies was covered up, I saw them unfolding a screen across the sky and hung up the sun, moon, and the stars. It has also been hard on him to have faked it for 20,000 years. He looked at Qin Mu and his tone dropped lower. I'm sorry. Qin Mu was slightly stunned and he said with a smile, Why are you apologizing to me? I've beaten you up, so I should be the one to apologize to you. First Ancestor Human Emperor shook his head. I had originally wanted to be your teacher and teach you all of my abilities and comprehension. But I've thought things through after you left. I have already harmed so many human emperors to have a lonely and bitter life. I couldn't do the same to you too. You should choose your own path. I was wrong for wanting to make you walk my path. Qin Mu bit his lips as he pressed them together into a thin line. After a short while, he opened up his arms and stretched his back. I hated you very much and wanted to beat you to death, but I can only defeat you on the same realm and I can't kill you. Besides, after beating you up this time, The hatred in my heart is no longer as intense. His expression was calm and he said insipidly, maybe you wanted to test me, maybe you wanted to encourage me, to make me work harder and surpass you. Whatever the case, I hold your methods in contempt. First Ancestor was slightly stunned and cried out, you saw through it? I'm not stupid. Qin Mu focused his gaze on the sun and said softly, however, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't use such a dumb and bad method to encourage the juniors. I won't even destroy the hard work of my family and destroy the corpses of my family. But you did all those. You are indeed an army deserter. I hold your character in contempt, so I chose not to learn your technique and divine arts. First Ancestor Human Emperor was silent. After a moment, he asked, who are the people that had taught you? They have taught you well. Qin Mu was in high spirits as his face revealed a look of respect. They are the best people in the world, the kindest people in the world. They are wise, upright, and have broad minds. As a human, they surpassed you 100 to 1,000 times. Do you know Village Chief? He is also the previous human emperor, the one that got beaten up by Grandmaster Qikong and the rest of the ancestors every day. He is the #1 elder in our village. I admire his knowledge the most. If it wasn't for him and his discovery that I have the Overlord body, I might still be herding cows in great ruins at this moment. There's also Granny C, the most beautiful and kindest woman in the village. She was the one who had picked me up and raised me. When it comes to the villagers, his words couldn't help flowing out as he talked endlessly about their good points. First Ancestor Human Emperor listened quietly. He only smiled and nodded after Qin Mu was finished. They have taught you well indeed. You are also very good. Qin Mu was taken aback and kept quiet. He was bewildered. Why did I tell him so much? I should be hating him. You are from Qin family and I'm also from Qin family. You should just treat me as a senior from the same family. First Ancestor Human Emperor seemed to know what he was thinking. He continued, now that you are facing a family member, you should have a lot of things you want to say. You must have not met any clansmen for a long time, right? Qin Mu nodded. Looking at this human emperor, he asked curiously, what's your name? Qin Wu. Qin Mu took out the family register of Qin family and flipped through in detail. He found Qin Wu's name and was awestruck at what he had seen. He was already an ancestor of 100 generations ago. At this moment, light suddenly appeared on the sea surface and surged forth like clouds. Huge bubbles came bubbling up from the sea. Qin Mu stood up and executed 9 Heaven's Eyes awakening skills to look towards South Sea. His heart was in an endless loop of shock and amazement as multicolored lights shone out from underneath the sea. They were like the precious rays that were given off by a treasure. However, the sea surface was quite far away from here, and his eyesight couldn't see the bottom of the sea. He didn't know what was giving off the precious rays. First Ancestor Human Emperor also stood up and looked over. The water is too deep. I can't see the bottom. Qin Mu immediately rose into the air and rushed towards the place where the precious light was emanating from. First Ancestor Human Emperor frowned slightly. Why are you so curious? If someone was targeting you and deliberately created some abnormal sights, you will probably run headlong like a silly roe deer. He hurriedly flew over with Qin Mu. They were getting closer and closer to the abnormal phenomenon, and even First Ancestor couldn't help feeling alarmed. The bubbles that were bubbling up to the surface were extremely huge, and every bubble had a radius of 100 miles. Dozens to hundreds of bubbles bubbling up at the same time made the sea look as though it was boiling. The huge waves that reached the sky surged out in all directions. Deafening rumbles sounded out and they were shockingly beyond compare. Qin Mu frowned slightly and looked in the direction of eternal peace. He then turned around and chased after the waves. First Ancestor Human Emperor quickly followed him and asked curiously, why did you turn back? Tsunami. Qin Mu rushed towards the shore as he said seriously, it's a tsunami. It will destroy dozens of miles of the shore. There are still people there. First Ancestor Human Emperor came to realization and suddenly landed down from the sky. With his head below and legs above, his palm gently pressed on the sea surface. His body then instantly bounced back to stand beside Qin Mu, and he calmly said, There's nothing to worry about now. I just stopped the tsunami. Qin Mu immediately stopped and turned around to take a look. He saw that the sea was calm again, and the world-shaking tsunami had actually calmed down under the power of first ancestor human emperor's Madra. Remarkable! Qin Mu sighed in admiration, sticking up his thumb. Truly remarkable. I had originally wanted to fly back to the shore to save and evacuate the people. Never did I expect you to be even better, calming the tsunami directly. Superb divine art. First ancestor human emperor smiled slightly. Do you want to learn? In terms of sword skills, I'm inferior to you, but in terms of Madra skills, I far surpass you. As long as you are willing. Not interested. Qin Mu turned around to leave and rushed to where the precious rays were bursting forth from. There were no terrifyingly huge bubbles anymore, and only multicolored rays were pouring out continuously. First ancestor human emperor shook his head and quickly caught up to him while thinking to himself, I have ways to make you learn. Qin Mu took in a long breath and suddenly dove into the sea. He dived straight down to the bottom of the ocean. First ancestor human emperor caught up and Qin Mu looked at him. He saw the vital qi around first ancestor human emperor's body swirling and transforming into a huge ball. He just walked in the seawater as though it was flat land. First ancestor saw him looking over and broke into a smile. If you want to learn. Humph. Qin Mu executed his creation technique and transformed into a huge fish to swim away. First ancestor human emperor didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he followed behind him. Qin Mu stopped swimming and blinked his eyes to look ahead. First ancestor human emperor also stopped and saw a piece of ancient and magnificent land appearing in front of their eyes. The ancient shrines were giving off dense divine rays. There were also majestic god statues standing upright underwater. The outer layers of mud on the divine statues were slowly shedding off. Qin Mu's heart was shocked as he gradually swam into this ancient land. He suddenly remembered the star Atlas that he had seen inside the shrine on the abnormal star above Luofu heaven. The place that was marked on the star Atlas 35,000 years ago is right here. This is the ancestral land of Crimson Light era. This is the place God Qi she wanted to find. As he swam past the magnificent structures, he saw that he was not the only one here. There were also some strange life forms, and most of them were huge fishes that grew 3 heads and 6 fins. They swam on this piece of land and seemed to be patrolling. A huge green and white-colored fish swam above their heads. It gave off a low cry that reverberated in their chest. These huge fishes. First ancestor human emperor had a change in expression and hurriedly grabbed Qin Mu's tail, pulling him into his vital qi bubble. He said solemnly, These huge fishes are strange. Don't move by yourself. Qin Mu transformed back into his true form and asked curiously, What's strange about them? You know that the corporeal bodies of the gods of founding emperor era had turned into stone statues, and their primordial spirits had gone into hiding in Fengdu, right? First ancestor human emperor's gaze swept across these fishes with 3 heads and 6 fins. The gods of Crimson Light era probably used a different method. They transformed themselves into creatures to hide from the pursuit of the celestial heavens. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 636. Divine Ring of Creation. Qin Mu's mind was blown as he stared blankly at a huge fish that had 3 heads and 6 fins. He cried out, What you mean is, these fishes are gods of Crimson Light era? Not just the fishes, the other sea creatures too. First ancestor human emperor looked at the other large-sized sea creatures that were swimming around. They also had 3 heads and 6 arms. They had huge membranes between their arms, so when they swam, the membranes would move up and down to push against the water. They swam very fast and were extremely agile in the water. Other than these sea beasts, there were actually sea snake demons with 3 heads and 6 arms. They had either a man's head or a woman's head. They also had arms and a flat tail. At that moment, they were currently swimming over to the ruins. Qin Mu even saw some walking plants that looked like corals and other vegetations in the sea. They had 3 crowns and their branches were definitely 6. There were also some strange creatures like sea anemone and jellyfish, and they also had 3 heads and 6 arms. Some jellyfish even grew faces. Their tentacles swayed, and they seemed to hear some kind of call that was hard to detect as they swam towards the ruins. They didn't preserve their intelligence? Qin Mu asked in a shocked voice. These strange sea creatures disregarded them and just swam around the ruins without any sort of direction, giving off cries that were low and melodious, or short and impassioned. They didn't treat Qin Mu and First Ancestor Human Emperor as invaders, so that meant their intelligence wasn't awakened. They were just heading towards the call without knowing anything. They don't have intelligence. First Ancestor Human Emperor brought him in front of a huge fish that was muddle-headed. Its huge eyes examined the two humans in front of it, but it soon lost interest in them and swam away. Only by doing so could they escape the pursuit of the celestial heavens. First Ancestor seemed to sigh and said, "Looks like they were the same as founding Emperor Era, suffering a destructive blow and a crushing defeat without any power to fight back at all. Thus, they might as well transform into sea creatures that had no minds of their own to show the celestial heavens that they were no longer a threat. Only then did they escape alive. The gods of Crimson Light Era changed the form of their corporeal bodies, and their primordial spirits have also been sealed. Since they were turned into life forms of the sea, without their god powers and divine arts, they naturally posed no threat anymore. They luckily lived on. Meanwhile, another batch of gods of Crimson Light Era journeyed far away to search for a place they could settle down. The person that's calling them over is Qi Shi. He's already here. Could he have some method to allow the beasts of Crimson Light Era to recover their original bodies and awaken their consciousness again? Qin Mu considered it for a moment before continuing with, "No wonder he kept saying that he had to return to his ancestral land. If all of these huge beasts are gods, God Qi Shi will be able to amass an army of tens of thousands of gods. In that case, eternal peace." He shivered uncontrollably at the thought. More and more strange beasts gathered, and there was a huge variety of them. If these huge creatures all transformed into gods with 3 heads and 6 arms, the first place they would take over after coming to shore would be eternal peace. There were also quite a number of gods in eternal peace, but because the time for development was too short, the number of gods might just amount to 20. Most of the gods now were fighting with the devils in Supreme Emperor Heaven. He could imagine how Emperor Yanfeng would wail and whine if the gods of Crimson Light Era were to really come ashore. Suddenly, rays of light burst forth from the center of this ruin. Twang! A ball of light expanded and brought the seawater to bombard Qin Mu and First Ancestor. Qin Mu could faintly feel as though these rays were sieving through him. The tremors were very fine, but they penetrated deeply as though the smallest atoms in his corporeal body were also trembling nonstop. This made his corporeal body and primordial spirit feel a numbing sensation. WHRRNG, WHRRNG, WHRRNG. Multiple rings of light expanded out from the center of the ruins and swept past their bodies over and over again. The seawater surged and the rings of light actually pushed the seawater away. The ball of light propped up a huge barrier, and not a single water stain could be seen in these ruins. Even the ground was completely dry. Bang, bang, bang. Huge beasts from above crashed into the ruins. Some crashed on the palaces while some crashed on the streets. The situation was very messy for a moment. Inside this ball of light, there seemed to be no air as these huge beasts opened their mouths while trying to suck in big mouthfuls of water, but they couldn't suck in anything. Some of these huge fishes with 3 heads and 6 arms were shaking their tails and fins, trying to crawl out. The plants in the sea also wanted to rush out of these ruins as they moved their roots to escape. However, the sea creatures were still running faster. At this moment, a pillar of light erupted from the ground and rushed into the sky. It pierced the sea above and opened up a passageway. Gale rushed in and poured into this underwater god city. The huge beasts seemed to instantly breathe. However, those huge fishes still couldn't as they continued to crawl outwards. All of a sudden, the ground where the light pillar had exploded out started to tremble. A huge circular ring gradually rose from it, and it gave off cracking sounds as a second ring appeared, followed by a third and a fourth. Extremely intricate runes appeared on the circular rings, and God Qi Shi was currently standing in the center with his 6 arms stretched out in all directions. The circular rings started to swirl and, With God Qi in the center, the runes surrounding him instantly lighted up. Bright runes flew out and shined in all directions. Qin Mu instantly saw runes falling on the sea creatures, and there were actually runes appearing on them. Those rune markings seemed to be complicated as they appeared like locks that were interlocked together, forming a kind of seal. When the runes of the circular rings shone on this seal, the locks opened up layer by layer. This is bad. He is about to unseal these gods of Crimson Light era and recover their true form. Qin Mu immediately made a decision and patted his Taotai sack. Mirrors flew out, and these mirrors were what he usually used to groom himself. He didn't have much, just 5 to 6 pieces. Qin Mu then took out his sword pellet, which expanded to form a huge mirror combined from 8,000 swords. This mirror flashed brightly. First Ancestor Human Emperor hurriedly stopped him and asked, "What are you doing?" Breaking his spell. Qin Mu quickly explained, God Qi is trying to use the runes on the rings to shine around and undo the seals on these huge beasts, returning them back to their original bodies. I just need to reflect the runes and flip them. This way, he won't be able to unseal these gods. First Ancestor Human Emperor widened his eyes as he stared at him. After a moment, he praised, "This divine weapon of God Qi is a divine weapon of creation. The runes on it are complicated beyond measure, and even I would need to spend much effort to solve it. Never did I expect you to think of such a simple method to render it useless. You are not only the Overlord body, you also have an incomparably smart brain of the Overlord. But there's no need for you to go through so much trouble. Just let him unseal them." Qin Mu shook his head. He was extremely nervous. "I can't. The gods of Crimson Light era are skilled in battles, and from the actions of God Qi, this person can resort to anything to achieve his goals. If the gods of Crimson Light were to be unsealed and recover their true bodies, this would probably be a disaster for eternal peace. The enemies of our enemies might not be a friend, they can also be enemies. He will never ally with us, so I have to break. There's already no need for that. You are looking from the perspective of the races. On the other hand, I'm looking from the perspective of paths, skills, and divine arts." First Ancestor Human Emperor's face revealed a look of pity as he shook his head. 35,000 years. She probably didn't expect the gods of their era to have experienced the changes of 35,000 years. The primordial spirits in their bodies are no longer what they were before. Aside from that, their souls aren't the souls in the past anymore. Qin Mu was stunned and put the small mirrors back in his Taotai sack. However, he still kept the huge mirror formed by the sword pellet. "What you mean is, the primordial spirits of these sea beasts and fishes can never be changed back anymore?" First Ancestor Human Emperor nodded his head. The time was dragged out for too long. Their primordial spirits had already started to become distorted. Crimson Light era shouldn't have high attainments on the soul and primordial spirit. They were inferior to Founding Emperor era. They forcefully used creation divine arts to transform the structure of the corporeal body and the primordial spirit. If they had changed back in time, they could still wake up. However, since it was dragged out for 35,000 years, the souls and primordial spirits were stuck in this different form for way too long. Not many of them will be able to awaken both their primordial spirit and soul. The person who had suggested this idea probably had an ill intention. Qin Mu's heart trembled violently as he asked in disbelief, "Do you mean that the person who had suggested this idea back then had purposely wanted the gods of Crimson Light era to never change back after becoming sea creatures?" First Ancestor Human Emperor nodded his head gently. This person might have submitted to the celestial heavens long ago, so he laid out such a trap for the gods of Crimson Light era. Qin Mu shuddered a few times. No wonder village chief and Grandpa Blind said I was too pure and not crafty enough. I'm indeed too innocent. The rings swirled continuously and countless runes shone quickly. More and more seals appeared on the bodies of the sea creatures, and the seals were continuously being undone. Their bodies were also starting to transform. When the rings gradually stopped, naked bodies of gods were laying everywhere in this magnificent underwater city. These gods with 3 heads and 6 arms were marked with tattoos unique to Crimson Light era. Their corporeal bodies were incomparably strong, They were the strongest bodies for combat. However, these gods remained lying on the ground and twitched their bodies continuously as though they were still fishes or sea monsters. Some of them even stood up and spread open their arms, as though they were underwater trees. Qin Mu even saw a god of Crimson Light era scrunching his toes on the ground. It must have transformed back from a jellyfish and still thought that he had tentacles. He was blinking his eyes furiously, as though he wanted to glow like a jellyfish. "Wake up, my clansmen, I'm back." God Qi Shi's voice reverberated throughout this god city with agitation as his three voices overlapped together. "Our Crimson Light era has returned. The battle has not yet ended. The Son of God from Crimson Light era is still waiting for your news. Wake up." First Ancestor Human Emperor scattered his Madras skill and they landed on the ground. He walked towards the source of God Qi Shi's voice and said, "Let us go over." Qin Mu followed him and God Qi Shi's voice rang out once more. This time, his voice brought along bewilderment and fear. "What happened to all of you? Why aren't any of you awake? Wake up. Have you forgotten our glory from 35,000 years ago?" His voice became more and more flustered. He didn't understand why these gods of Crimson Light era didn't wake up like he had expected them to. He executed the rings over and over again, and runes flew out in all directions. However, they were useless on these gods. Not long after, Qin Mu and First Ancestor Human Emperor came to the bottom of the ring, and God Qi Shi detected them. The rings stopped spinning, and this executioner of an ancient era turned his three heads to look over. He stared at them with a cold gaze. "Cult Master Qin." Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out and Qin Mu looked towards the source of the voice. He saw Pangong Tso standing on a tall tower, looking at him excitedly. Qin Mu was surprised and he waved his hands at him. "Grandmaster, why are you here too?" Pangong Tso laughed, and his body trembled as his corporeal body transformed to have 3 heads and 6 arms. He sprinted down from the tower as his 3 heads shouted, "I've been looking for you for a long time. Now I can finally take my revenge. Look at my Anusrava fighting god technique." His footsteps stepped on the tall tower and he sprinted straight down. His 6 arms moved up and down as the Madra on his 6 palms changed unpredictably. Claps of thunder rang out as the air exploded and bolts of lightning crisscrossed in the air, randomly striking everywhere. The Madra skills of Anusrava fighting god technique were extremely terrifying, and since he had more arms, he had no openings all around him. His attack speed had increased significantly and this technique simply had no openings. It could even absorb other people's chi and blood to allow oneself to remain at the peak state. Qin Mu raised his head to look up. Before Pangong Tso could even reach him, gales pressured down like a mountain pressing down, and the land around Qin Mu was sinking continuously. The terrifying pressure he was withstanding couldn't be imagined. Pangong Tso let out a hearty laugh as he descended from the sky. The full power of Anusrava fighting god technique was released. Boom! Pangong Tso's body trembled violently and flew back to crash into a palace hall. The smiles on his faces had yet to be wiped off. Overlapping hands. Qin Mu put his right hand forward and his left hand back. With his palms interlocked, he pushed towards Pangong Tso across space, and the overlapping power of yin-yang heaven-flipping hands burst forth. With another loud explosion, rocks flew in random directions and the wall crumbled. Pangong Tso and the wall of the palace hall sunk into the hall. Qin Mu pushed dozens of times, and dozens of explosions came from the hall before he finally stopped. He runs so fast. Qin Mu shook his head and praised, as expected of Grandmaster. His cultivation has such an astonishing increase again, so he's probably not far away from life and death realm now. Grandmaster still can take a beating as usual, and he's still so agile. Behind God Qi Shi, Pangong Tso's figure suddenly appeared, and he was covered with blood. He had broken 5 out of 6 arms and 2 out of 3 necks. His 2 heads also hung down weakly while his body swayed before collapsing on the ground, convulsing rapidly. "Qin brat you!" Pangong Tso coughed up huge mouthfuls of blood. Qin Mu turned around as though nothing significant happened. He greeted Qi Shi. "Senior Qi Shi, we meet again. Crimson Light Era is truly remarkable. The runes on this circular ring are runes from Creation Divine Arts. Can Senior explain to me? His two eyes were in high spirits as he revealed a look of anticipation, seeking knowledge sincerely. This expression is exactly the same as a silly roe deer. Veins popped out on the forehead of first ancestor human emperor as he thought secretly to himself. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 637. Fighting Up 300 Floors. When Qi-Shi's gaze swept past Qin Mu, his pupils contracted. It was evident that he had seen Qin Mu, and it reminded him of Saint Woodcutter and the time he was played by him. When he attacked Saint Woodcutter by surprise, he was beaten up badly. Saint Woodcutter just sent him straight to the territory of Supreme Emperor Heaven, and he had almost died because of that. If he didn't meet Pan Gongtso, this person that was skilled in escaping, he would have already died in the hands of the devil race. He averted his gaze and looked at first ancestor human emperor. His heart suddenly twitched violently, as if there was an invisible pressure bearing down on his heart. That was the misperception that first ancestor human emperor's aura had on him. This person seemed to be wedged between a collapsing heaven and earth, being all alone in the world. That kind of deep loneliness and sorrow even affected Qi-Shi. Are you a god of founding emperor era or a god of high emperor era? Qi-Shi composed himself and asked. Founding emperor. First ancestor human emperor had a slight headache towards Qin Mu, who was brimming with curiosity. He said softly, the paths, skills, and divine arts of Crimson Light Era are indeed admirable. But, Dao brother, you should already see that it's impossible for you to awaken these Dao friends of yours. Their spirits have been lost for too long. They won't be waking up anymore. The corners of Qi-Shi's eyes twitched. He sneered and said in a coarse voice, could it be you who had schemed and laid hands on my people? First ancestor human emperor frowned. Qi-Shi's words made him slightly uncomfortable. Qin Mu also made him slightly uncomfortable. Qin Mu had already moved all the way to the front of those rings and was currently examining the runes on them. He was trying to unravel the marvel that was hidden inside this creation divine art. From Qi-Shi's words, he could obviously sense enmity. And for Qin Mu to move up at this time, he was too confident in his abilities. Qin Mu was full of confidence, but first ancestor didn't have such strong confidence in himself. This was the God City of Crimson Light Era. Looking at the layout, this place should be some celestial palace in Crimson Light celestial heaven that had sunk into South Sea. God Qi-Shi came back here painstakingly, so it shouldn't be just for the divine ring of creation. There should still be other powerful divine weapons. The divine weapons that Crimson Light Era used to guard the celestial palaces must definitely be powerful. It just wasn't known if God Qi-Shi had gotten them or not. Dao brother is mistaken. First ancestor human emperor said calmly, I didn't lay my hands on your Dao friends. Instead, your Crimson Light Era researched only the corporeal body, which resulted in your soul, spirit embryo, and attainments in primordial spirit to be slightly lacking. Since your Dao friends had morphed for too long, this caused their souls and primordial spirits to morph as well. Qi-Shi's eyes flashed with a fierce glint and he chuckled. Your attainments in creation divine arts are very superior? First ancestor human emperor said, I'm not an expert, but I've met experts in founding emperor celestial heavens before. His research on the corporeal body is inferior to Crimson Light Era, but he only focused on studying souls, spirit embryos, and arts of the primordial spirit, so his attainments are extraordinary. I have learned some from him too. Qin Mu's heart stirred slightly. Could it be Saint Woodcutter? Great educational heavenly devil scriptures had 7 chapters and they are all arts of creations. Saint Woodcutter must indeed have superior attainments in the art of creation. With my insight, your clansmen would probably have some people who will wake up after 3 to 5 years, but most of them won't be able to wake up. First ancestor human emperor sincerely added, Crimson Light Era and founding emperor era have the same enemy. May Dao brother put down your enmity. If we ally ourselves together, there might be a good outcome. I learned some arts of creation, so I might just be able to undo the damage and save some people back. Qi-Shi took a step forward and shouted, If you really have the abilities to save my clansmen, take them out. Are you keeping them to yourself and don't want to hand them over? His left head sneered and said, "That's right. He's coercing us. He wants to use the art of creation to force us into becoming his slave and fight for him." His right head roared furiously, "We can chop off his head and search his soul. Won't we be able to get his art of creation in that way?" First Ancestor Human Emperor frowned and shook his head. "You are unreasonable." Qin Mu turned his head back and said, "First Ancestor, I've told you before, the enemy of an enemy might not be a friend. Sacred Teacher once said that the people of Crimson Light era cultivated the fighting methods of the corporeal body. Most of the time, they relied on martial prowess to settle matters. This Qi Shi is even the executioner of Crimson Light celestial heavens. He's ruthless in his methods, and it's all good if you beat him. If you can't, he will beat you and sever your head to extract your soul for studying." First Ancestor Human Emperor frowned even more and said patiently, "Dao brother, we both have the same enemies, so we should join forces. Truth to be told, this Human Emperor Qin is the link to connect founding Emperor era and Eternal Peace Empire. He is even the rare Overlord body that's in this world." "Overlord body?" Qi Shi revealed a look of disbelief as he cried out, "This brat has the Overlord body? The Overlord body of the legends?" Rumors said that there was an appearance of an Overlord body 40,000 years ago during Dragon Han era. Qin Mu's heart felt reassured. Village Chief is indeed learned and knowledgeable. He actually knew that there was an Overlord body that had appeared 40,000 years ago during Dragon Han era. First Ancestor Human Emperor said, "Since you know about the Overlord body, we have even more reason to sit down and talk. I can't trust anyone. I can't trust you and that crafty Overlord body brat. I definitely wouldn't become the dowry of your founding Emperor era and this Eternal Peace era that's barely surviving." Qi Shi erupted with a roar, his aura suddenly bursting forth. "My Crimson Light era shall make a comeback and descend on the world once again. No matter if it's Eternal Peace or Founding Emperor, you will all have to submit to us. Hand over the art of creation and I can spare you from dying. You can become my follower." First Ancestor Human Emperor suddenly relaxed and shook his head. "Dao brother, it is no longer Crimson Light era now. If you use the paths, skills, and divine arts of Crimson Light era, you have no chance of victory against me." All of a sudden, Qi Shi burst forth with his divine arts and struck one palm towards Qin Mu. Just as his divine art was activated, First Ancestor's Heaven and Earth Mudra had directly smashed into the divine ring of creation. With a loud boom, Qi Shi's figure vanished and a huge hall behind him exploded apart. Bang, bang, bang. In a straight line, shrines and palaces exploded one after another. Dozens of palaces were crushed into powder, and there were towers that got severed in the middle, causing them to come crumbling down. Pan Gong Tso, who was sprawled on the ground, fell into a daze. Qin Mu smiled at him gently. "Grandmaster, there's no need to be so surprised. When you used the divine arts of 35,000 years ago to attack me, this was also the result." Pan Gong Tso's expression changed drastically. His body suddenly vanished without a trace again. God Qi Shi crashed quite some distance before finally stopping. He gave a shout, "Crimson Light heaven-suppressing floor. Come out!" The ground trembled violently and it cracked open. Precious light broke out from the uneven crack. The light was extremely gorgeous like the aurora of the polar region. After a short moment, the ground rose up, as though there were some huge objects slowly rising up underneath it. A majestic and tall building, about 3,000 yards high, suddenly rose up from the ground. Even after 35,000 years, the building remained fresh, its precious rays lighting up the sea in various colors for 1,000 miles. Qin Mu looked over in awe and shock, his gaze turning blank. Under the eaves of every level in heaven-suppressing floor, all kinds of divine weapons were actually hanging. Not only were divine weapons hanging off the eaves, but there was also a powerful divine weapon being worshipped on every floor. Those divine weapons gave off pulses that gripped at people's hearts. The waves of aura from them nearly materialized to leak out continuously from the floor. This building had around 1,000 floors and the divine weapons hanging from the eaves were uncountable. The divine weapons being worshipped on the floors had also reached 1,000. They were probably the treasures that guarded each floor. Qin muttered, "If I could take this away and bring it to eternal peace, the value of this thing could make the emperor give up his throne." First ancestor human emperor stared at him. He then walked over to that heaven-suppressing floor. "Stay here, don't run around. Don't even think of touching this building too. Just study your creation divine art here obediently." Qin nodded, his eyes still in a daze as he stared at the tall building that was shining with a variety of colors. On the other side, God Qi was already on the first floor of the divine building. He took out the divine weapon that was being worshipped on the first floor. It was a divine knife. She took down the divine knife from the sacrificial altar, and another divine knife appeared on the altar. She grabbed this divine knife, and another divine knife appeared again. She had grabbed 6 times until no more knives appeared. Qin Mu looked at the situation inside the building and said loudly, "First ancestor, Crimson Light Era's divine weapons are usually in a set of 6. Got it." First ancestor human emperor walked into the building and saw God Qi swinging 6 divine knives at him. He heard a world-shaking explosion as God Qi retreated back into the floor with messed-up footsteps. First ancestor human emperor walked into the first floor and God Qi's knife skills suddenly started operating. All of a sudden, the divine weapons hanging under the eaves of the first floor burst forth with power to strike at first ancestor human emperor. Qin Mu studied the runes of the divine ring of creation leisurely. He took out some paper and brush and copied everything down. Pan Gongzhou, who was far away, gave a cheer when he saw the sight in the building. "Nice kill." Boom! Countless divine weapons shattered, and the shattered pieces flew in all directions, piercing through countless palaces. Pan Gongzhou hurriedly shrank his head back in utter fear. Qin Mu didn't even turn his head. "Grandmaster, don't underestimate the first human emperor of Hall of Human Emperors. Qi has this celestial palace of Crimson Light Era, but first ancestor human emperor also controls the Hall of Human Emperors. The secret behind the Hall of Human Emperors isn't any smaller than this Crimson Light Celestial Palace." While Qin Mu was talking, Qi had already fallen back to the second floor. In an instant, countless divine weapons on the second floor exploded and turned into powder. As the two of them fought, Qi fell back step by step. He found it hard to defend himself. Pan Gongzhou raised his head to take a look and cried out, "That human emperor didn't use any spirit weapons and just fought with his 2 hands. He shattered all the precious artifacts that suppressed the celestial palace of Crimson Light Era." When Qin Mu heard this, his heart trembled slightly. He looked at once at Crimson Light heaven-suppressing floor. He indeed saw that first ancestor human emperor was bare-fisted, and he was revered between heaven and earth. He let heaven and earth run amok, and as long as he didn't fall, heaven and earth would never collapse. Heaven and earth Madra is truly powerful. Qin Mu pulled back his gaze and continued studying the runes. "A pity they aren't as good as my sword skills." First ancestor human emperor fought God Qi all the way up to the 300th floor. He seemed slightly delighted as he thought, "When human emperor Qin sees my Madra, he will definitely change his mind and beg me to teach it to him." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 638. Submissive. Qin Mu copied the runes on the divine ring of creation wholeheartedly. Memory was never as good as writing down, and as he copied, layers of comprehension would instantly appear in his mind. The meaning of some runes could be naturally comprehended after copying them once, so he would comprehend several divine arts in the creation of the corporeal body. However, there were some rune markings that needed to be deduced to be able to know the marvel within. I should really have brought a few hundred scholars from Eternal Peace. If we researched and copied together, our speed would surely be incredible. With so many scholars copying together, there will definitely be all kinds of strange and marvelous insights. This was the effect of a dynasty. A myriad of talents in every field could work together and carry out large-scale research. Their speed would be surprisingly fast and would far surpass the speed of a single researcher. What a pity Qi has a nature of not submitting unless he gets beaten up first. He needs to be beaten up badly before he will become submissive and be willing to work with us. Qin Mu used his vital qi to light up the runes on the divine ring of creation and push them to transform. Once this task was done, he continued copying the runes. He thought to himself, First Ancestor's abilities aren't bad. I just don't know if he can subdue him. Inside Crimson Light Heaven suppressing floor, First Ancestor Human Emperor was exceptionally dauntless as he fought up to the 300th floor. This building was a precious treasure that suppressed the celestial palaces. Its power was surprisingly huge, and the divine weapon worshipped on every floor was one of the most famous divine weapons of Crimson Light era. On top of that, all of these divine weapons were in a set of 6. God Qi Shi used his own magic power and the power of the divine weapon burst forth. After that burst of power, his abilities leveled up. Together with the hanging treasures on every floor, they formed a formation. The power of the 1,000 treasure formation was surprisingly huge as they attacked First Ancestor Human Emperor. The 1,000 divine weapons shook as beams of divine might struck towards First Ancestor Human Emperor. The 6 treasures in Qi Shi's hands also swung up and down with overflowing divine might. However, they were all shattered by the Human Emperor with brute force. The 1,000 treasure formation outside the floor was also destroyed, forcing Qi Shi, who had been blown away, to retreat to the next level. As they reached the upper levels, the power of the treasure that was being worshipped became greater and greater. Likewise, the formation of the divine weapons outside became stronger and stronger. When First Ancestor Human Emperor fought continuously to the 800th floor, he started feeling exhausted. Actually, after the 300th floor, it was no longer Qi Shi who was controlling these treasures. It was the treasures that were controlling Qi Shi. Qi Shi's own power was already insignificant when compared to the power of the precious treasures and the formation. First Ancestor Human Emperor was now fighting against the treasures and formations of Crimson Light Heaven suppressing floor. He had fought his way up to the 800th floor with brute force. If I continue fighting like this, I will be injured. First Ancestor Human Emperor's gaze flickered and he thought to himself, from the looks of it, Qi Shi couldn't withstand any longer. His Anasrava fighting god technique wasn't completely flawless and without any opening. He only relied on absorbing the qi and blood of other people to maintain himself at peak performance. However, the prerequisite was he had to first injure his opponent. If the opponent was not injured, he would be helpless and can only exhaust his vital qi cultivation, making him weaker and weaker. Qi Shi's 3 heads and 6 arms were indeed incomparably powerful for battles, but he was still much weaker than him. He was long covered in injuries and couldn't hold on much longer. The reason why Qi Shi was still able to hold on was mainly because First Ancestor Human Emperor had been holding back his power. He wanted to convince Qin Mu and let him see the power of his heaven and earth Madra, making Qin Mu willing to learn from him. Also, the reason why First Ancestor Human Emperor had fought all the way to the 800th floor was to show Qin Mu the exquisiteness of his Madra skills. As long as his exquisite moves caught Qin Mu's eyes, Qin Mu would be interested. First Ancestor could then take advantage of the situation and push him to learn. It would be a win-win situation. I've already fought my way to the 800th floor and showed all I can show. It's time to end this. First Ancestor Human Emperor suddenly erupted with his full power as he executed his everlasting universe Madra. With his Madra pressing down, the space inside the floor nearly solidified and God Qi Shi became fixed in the air, his body trembling violently. As though he was suffering from 100 terrifying blows, his body shook 100 times. The treasures in his hands suddenly lost control as they burst forth with power to strike at First Ancestor Human Emperor. These 6 treasures were no longer under Qi Shi's control. They automatically attacked First Ancestor Human Emperor by themselves. First Ancestor Human Emperor pulled out his sword, and with a swing, several clangs were heard as those 6 treasures became instantly broken. They lost their power and were destroyed straight away by this divine sword. First Ancestor's attainments in sword skills weren't high, but what was truly strong was the sword in his hands. The divine might in this sword could actually fight with the entire Crimson Light Heaven suppressing floor. It was obvious it wasn't any ordinary treasure. Hall of Human Emperors was built on one of the 36 celestial heavens, and this sword of his was Jade Brightness Sword, a treasure that founding Emperor Celestial Heavens used to suppress Jade Brightness Palace. The personal sword of a prince was naturally extraordinary. When this sword was drawn, all of the divine weapons hanging outside the floor were also trembling violently. Their powers swept in all directions as rays of divine light that were 100 miles long flashed past. They sliced the space in the surroundings, causing them to shake non-stop. First Ancestor Human Emperor scattered his Madras skill and she collapsed on the ground with a thud. The divine weapons hanging outside the floor clattered as they all dropped down. The sight of all the divine weapons dropping from the 1,000 floors was truly magnificent. This was the result of the collision between the power of Crimson Light Heaven-Suppressing Floor and Jade Brightness Sword. The Crimson Light Heaven-Suppressing Floor was no match for the sword, and thus, all the treasures in the building were cut down. Even though the power of this sword was very strong, First Ancestor didn't have much attainments in sword skills, so he rarely used it. When Pangong Tso saw this sight, he shivered and hesitated for a moment. His body then gradually faded away and vanished. The 3 heads of she coughed up blood and he crawled up the stairs to the 801st floor, but he slid back down again. Dao brother, neither of us has to die. First Ancestor swung his sword back into its sheath and went forward to help him up. I really mean no harm and you should be able to see that. If I used my full power right from the start, you wouldn't have been able to survive. Your Crimson Light era and my Founding Emperor era are both in the same plight. We have hidden in seclusion for so long. So why should we let our relationship turn sour just because of a misunderstanding? Shi's 3 heads panted heavily and he struggled. You are trying to make the gods of my Crimson Light era fall into the control of eternal peace. Eternal peace is merely a small country, and it's a country that any god from Crimson Light era could easily wipe out. How can I accept submitting to eternal peace? If I submitted, how am I supposed to answer to Son of God when I return? First Ancestor Human Emperor said righteously, You are mistaken. My original intention is to form an alliance and not let Crimson Light era submit to us. The strong practitioners of Crimson Light era didn't submit to the celestial heavens for tens of thousands of years, so why would you submit to eternal peace? I admire the moral integrity of the seniors of Crimson Light era, so I definitely won't insult you guys. May Dao brother she consider this again. She sat up and stopped the bleeding from his wounds. He sneered and said, Why didn't you say so earlier? First Ancestor Human Emperor shook his head. I said it, but you were insistent on beating me to death and search my soul. With unsteady movements, she slowly stood up. He finally gave in and apologized. I was wrong. Let me apologize to you. First Ancestor hurriedly took him by the arm and said, I was also too hard on my blows too. She nursed his injuries for a while and stumbled down the stairs. Even though my Crimson Light dynasty can ally with you, we will never submit to anyone. Besides, I alone can't make this decision. I need to contact Son of God. Only he can make a decision. First Ancestor frowned slightly. Must I really fight once more with this Crimson Light Son of God? Are the people of Crimson Light era all this stubborn? Aren't they a little too hard to deal with? For over 20,000 years, he had been wallowing in his own guilt and blame for not going to the battlefield, so he had stayed aloof from worldly affairs. At this moment, he was only thinking of how to push the responsibility of Crimson Light era to someone else. He thought, it's still better for Human Emperor Qin to deal with this kind of troublesome matter. However, he didn't know that Qin Mu was usually the one who washes his hands off all responsibility. He only provided ideas and left the work to Heavenly Saint Cult, or people like Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and Emperor Yanfeng. First Ancestor Human Emperor and she walked down from Crimson Light Heavenly Suppressing Floor and came to the side of the Divine Ring of Creation. They saw Qin Mu was still executing this Divine Ring and earnestly studying the transformation of the runes. First Ancestor Human Emperor gave a slight smile and thought to himself, He's a youth after all. He's still very reserved and can't bring himself to learn my Madras skills. I shall give him a step to come down later and he will learn my Madras skills. You guys have finished fighting? Qin Mu was surprised and turned his head back to look at them. So fast? I haven't even had the time to finish copying these runes. Keep up the act. First ancestor human emperor sneered inwardly, but he said with a pleasant face, "I have already talked with Tao brother Qi. At last, we didn't fall out completely." Qin Mu looked at crimson light heaven's suppressing floor. The precious building that was still shining with precious rays just now was now completely bare. Its light had also dimmed. He then looked at God Qi. He didn't know how many bones were broken in this executioner's body. His flesh was all bloodied and one head was hanging down, as though its neck was broken. Truly had not fallen out, he secretly thought to himself. God Qi's expression was also slightly terrible as he said, "Little friend Qin has gotten hold of my God execution mysterious knife, so please give it back." Qin Mu shook his head. "Sacred teacher gave me that small case. I can't return it to you. The rule of our great ruins is we never return anything we had relied on our abilities to steal, pick up, and given by others who had stolen it." He continued seriously, "I was picked up by Granny, and she said she won't return me to anyone even if they wanted me. My grandpa cripple steals things from everywhere to give to others, and they never need to return them as well." She was speechless from anger and his entire body was trembling. First ancestor human emperor quickly said, "Tao brother, he is still a child." It wasn't good for him to erupt in anger, so he said coldly, "Every time God execution mysterious knife is opened, it will need to drink blood to nourish its blade. Otherwise, it will have to devour its owner in return. You have already used it once, haven't you? I see blood light plaguing you. The next time you open up the case, God execution mysterious knife will kill you to drink your blood." Qin Mu was shocked and his heart felt uneasy. First ancestor human emperor asked, "What knife? Show it to me and I'll take a look." Qin Mu took out the small case and gave it to first ancestor human emperor. The latter then examined the small case in detail. He studied it for a moment, and his expression changed slightly when he couldn't open it. God execution knife of crimson light era, an artifact of great danger. There's a grievance of a god on emperor's throne inside. It's extremely terrifying. He still wanted to return it to Qi, but Qin Mu hurriedly said, "Be careful. He'll use the knife to kill you." First ancestor was stunned. He returned the small case to Qin Mu. "Don't use it if you don't have the need to. I can feel the grievance and murderous intent of a strong practitioner on emperor's throne coming out from it. You have already used it once, right? That time, it didn't manage to drink any blood. So the grievances are already plaguing you. It's best if you let it drink blood to quell its grievances against you." Qin Mu nodded his head. He pressed down the case while asking God Qi, "Senior, can you call out your useless disciple, that fellow with 2 deer legs?" Pan Gongzhou, who was hiding in a dark spot, was planning to come out when he heard Qin Mu's words. He suddenly came to a realization and he couldn't help becoming furious. "This scoundrel wants to sacrifice me to the knife." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 639, Crazy from Being Poor. God Qi naturally wasn't willing to hand Pan Gongzhou over as a sacrifice to him. He snorted, "It's not that I can't let you keep God execution mysterious knife first. Face the consequence yourself if you get devoured by the knife." Qin Mu kept the case, his gaze wavering. "Since Senior Qi is the executioner of Crimson Light era and has possessed this treasure for tens of thousands of years, you should know how to get rid of the grievances plaguing the case, right?" Qi nearly burst with anger. "You stole my treasure, yet you are still asking me how to use it? Why don't you steal it?" "Oh right, you already stole it from me." Qin Mu looked at first ancestor human emperor. His gaze seemed to suggest that he wanted him to beat Qi up once more, forcing him to tell him the method. First ancestor human emperor understood what he wanted, but he shook his head with a troubled expression. "I've already beaten him enough, so I can't beat him anymore. At most, you don't use the knife inside the case from today onwards. This kind of fierce weapon becomes fiercer the more you feed it, and it will never be full. What if one day you kill a few people and it still isn't full? It will drink your blood instead." Qin Mu jumped in shock. If it was truly as what first ancestor had said, using this knife was indeed incomparably dangerous. Crimson Light Celestial Heavens had used this fierce weapon to kill people because they had quite a number of gods they had to escort up to God Execution stage every day. Therefore, God Execution Mysterious Knife had always been full. Xi's words made him very fearful of this small case. It was obvious he couldn't completely control this small case. Back then, Xi had encountered the devil race, and he got injured after a huge fight with them. As a result, his chi and blood were absorbed by God Execution stage and God Execution Mysterious Knife, nearly killing his corporeal body. He had no choice but to seal himself and become a dried corpse. It could be said that even when one possessed the method to control it, the fierce knife was still extremely dangerous. However, if Qin Mu were to throw the small case away, he would be reluctant to it. First Ancestor Human Emperor looked at Xi and said, "Dao brother, let us ally ourselves. Shall Dao brother discuss with Human Emperor Qin and find a solution that's beneficial for both sides?" Xi looked at Qin Mu. He suddenly remembered that Qin Mu had poisoned him and played all kinds of tricks on him. "I'm not going to ally with you anymore. This brat is too crafty. I will definitely be at a disadvantage if I ally with him." Teacher is right. Pangong Tso showed himself from a distance. He shouted, "If you join forces with him, you still have to count money for him after being betrayed. I myself have experienced that." Qin Mu was furious. He took out the small case, as though he wanted to sacrifice him to the knife. She said calmly, "If you can't kill him, you will be killed next." Qin Mu hesitated and tucked the small case away. He mumbled, "I have fought together with Grandmaster through life and death. Grandmaster is like a brother to me, so how could I lay my hands on him?" Pangong Tso's fury couldn't be contained. "Who's your brother? Don't make up stories and slander me." First Ancestor Human Emperor felt his head aching. He truly didn't want to be the middleman to help both sides form an alliance. Qin Mu said with a smile, "Since Senior Qi isn't willing to discuss with me, how about you discuss with the Emperor of Eternal Peace? The era now is Eternal Peace era, and as the emissary of Crimson Light era, having the Emperor speak to you personally is also respectable enough." Xi's heart trembled slightly. He nodded his head. "Before I meet the Emperor, you must impart your art of creation to me." First Ancestor Human Emperor was about to nod and say something when he saw Qin Mu shook his head. He immediately shut his mouth. Qin Mu's gaze flickered. "I've heard that there's a Crimson Light Son of God in Crimson Light era? He should be the one that decides the matters, right? We can first discuss the terms. As for the art of creation, First Ancestor can check your clansmen and see if he's able to save them and help them recover their memory. However, before we meet the Crimson Light Son of God, we can't teach it to you." She accepted it reluctantly and said, "There's no time to lose. Let's go meet the Emperor immediately." Qin Mu looked towards Crimson Light Heaven's suppressing floor and saw all the divine weapons piled up below it. He exclaimed to himself in pity, "It would be nice if I could go over and pick up a few items. Also, if Divine Ring of Creation is executed in reverse, it would probably seal the corporeal body and primordial spirit. It's a method to transform people into creatures. If it landed in my hands, it will be great to use it on enemies." Divine Ring of Creation was used as a tool for sealing people, but in Qin Mu's eyes, this item definitely had an unimaginably strong power. If he executed this divine ring in reverse and shone the runes on his opponents, any normal gods would probably have the structure of their corporeal bodies and primordial spirits changed, turning them into harmless creatures. The most crucial point was that the area of effect of this kind of divine ring was in all directions. Hundreds to thousands of miles in all directions would be affected by the runes. If this were to be used in a god battlefield, all of the gods would become huge fishes and sea creatures. This would enable his comrades to kill them however they wanted. This was the marvel use of creation techniques. Using the ring to unseal was simply wasting a huge potential. Once we reach the capital city, I must make the Emperor get this divine ring, Qin Mu thought to himself. When she forcefully executed his magic power, Qin Mu saw the divine weapons flying back to their original positions in this 1,000-storied building. They shone once again with dazzling and precious rays. Qi then gave a roar and circulated his magic power. This divine building of 3,000 yards became smaller and smaller until it landed in his palm. It shone with 10 colors, and its lights were like trails of fine beams swirling around it. Qin Mu was very envious. Once she summoned Pangong Tso over, everyone left the underwater god city and made their way to eternal peace. First Ancestor Human Emperor and Shi's speeds were all very fast as they brought Pangong Tso and Qin Mu to fly. They were several times faster than Fan Yunxiao's fast ship, as evidenced by the mountains moving rapidly below them. After a few hours, they arrived at Eternal Peace's capital city. Qin Mu originally planned to sacrifice Pangong Tso to the knife, but he never found a chance. How I wish I could kill a few people, the youth thought to himself as he touched the small case in his Taotai sack. Pangong Tso's heart was pounding the whole time on their journey. He was afraid Qin Mu would suddenly jump out and kill him. Luckily for him, she guarded him quite well. When they came to the capital city, First Ancestor Human Emperor directly descended on the imperial palace. Qin Mu summoned a guard over to let him inform the emperor. After a moment, Yan Zhigui hurriedly walked out from the palace with small and quick steps. He said with a smile, "Human Emperor Qin, everyone. His Majesty is already waiting for the emissary from Crimson Light Era in the audience hall. Please follow me." "Lord Yan, please lead the way," said Qin Mu in a solemn voice. While they were walking towards the audience hall, Yan Zhigui turned around and looked at the three-headed and six-armed Qi. His heart was astonished. He asked Qin Mu in a hushed voice, "Emissary of Crimson Light Era? What's his origin?" 35,000 years ago, Crimson Light Era built the celestial heavens. After the celestial heavens fell into South Sea, a small portion of them escaped. This Qi is an executioner of the celestial heavens from that era. He has the abilities of a true god or a heavenly god. Yan Zhigui was stunned. When they came to the audience hall, they saw Emperor Yanfeng sitting on the dragon throne. Qi bowed as he entered. Crimson Light Celestial Heavens Emissary Qi pays his respects to the ruler of eternal peace. Emperor Yanfeng raised his hands and smiled. "Stand up and talk. Since you are an emissary of a past dynasty, I can't be sloppy. Bring him a seat." He turned to First Ancestor Human Emperor and greeted him. "Hall of Human Emperors, First Ancestor Human Emperor, this little king is honored." First Ancestor returned his greeting. "Human Emperor is only a name, but your Majesty is the Son of Heaven. There's no need to be courteous." "Human Emperor, please take a seat," Emperor Yanfeng said. A guard beside them moved a couple of chairs for them. Qi took a seat while Pangong Tso stood on his left. First Ancestor Human Emperor also sat down. Emperor Yanfeng's gaze moved around and landed on Qin Mu. He felt a slight headache, but he said with a smile, "Minister Qin, come closer to me. I haven't seen you for a long while. Come speak beside me." Qin Mu went up to the throne room and came to the right side of the dragon throne. Emperor Yanfeng was full of smiles. He asked Qin Mu in a voice that was as low as a mosquito's buzz, "What's happening? Where is he from? What era is Crimson Light Era? How long ago is it?" Qin Mu's consciousness pulsed gently as he used the communication method of Heavenly Feather Race. He explained everything briefly and said lastly, "Your Majesty, Qi has something to ask from us. We can rip him off." Emperor Yanfeng put his heart at ease, and he laughed loudly. "I have long known about Crimson Light Celestial Heavens that have landed in South Sea, and I too find it a pity that the once glorious dynasty is no more. I frequently go to South Sea to pay respects to the seniors and distinguished predecessors, and even I couldn't help shedding tears. I have never expected that I could still meet an expert of Crimson Light Era today. Mr. Qi, you are a guest from afar, and since you want to form an alliance with Eternal Peace, this is naturally extremely good for us. However, since my Eternal Peace Empire is weak, we can't even protect ourselves. On the outside, we have devils that are causing troubles in Supreme Emperor Heaven, and on the inside, the gods of the celestial heavens could revive any time from their stone statues. With worries on both the inside and outside, my empire is truly lacking some treasures that could suppress the fate." Qin Mu coughed and said, "Your Majesty, The thing in Mr. Qi hands is the treasure of Crimson Light Era. It has a total of 1,000 layers, and millions of divine weapons are hanging on its eaves. It's called Crimson Light Heaven Suppressing Floor. Qi's expression changed slightly. Your Majesty, I'm an emissary, and I didn't bring any treasure for this visit. Emperor Yanfeng tilted his body and said with a low voice, Minister Qin, so emissary didn't bring any offerings when coming to meet me? Qin Mu hesitated for a moment before saying in a suppressed voice, Poor. Emperor Yanfeng came to a realization and said, This alliance has no sincerity. Qi frowned, and he gritted his teeth. He was planning to take out Crimson Light Heaven Suppressing Floor as an offering when Pan Gongzhou hurriedly whispered, Teacher, don't let them fool you. This emperor and that Qin brat are the same kind of people. They are full of evil ideas. Teacher just needs to play along with them. Qi endured it. He took out a dragon-shaped jade pendant from Crimson Light Heaven Suppressing Floor and said, A small gift for your Majesty. A court official carried it forward and gave it to Emperor Yanfeng. When Emperor Yanfeng was examining the jade pendant, it separated into 6 pendants which transformed into 6 real dragons. The dragons flew around in the audience hall, and after they finished dancing in the air, they coiled themselves around the pillars. Emperor Yanfeng was immensely delighted. Qin Mu tugged on his dragon robe while sneaking a piece of folded paper to him. He said in a low voice, Your Majesty, that's just a drop in the ocean. I've written a list of items, and Your Majesty can use this list to negotiate. Emperor Yanfeng opened up the slip of paper in secret, and his eyes widened. Minister Qin, is this poor? Even if you sell my Eternal Peace Empire, I don't have that much wealth. Even if he was the Emperor of Eternal Peace Empire, he couldn't help sucking in a cold breath from seeing that list of items. Emissary has come from afar, so please retire and take a rest first. Emperor Yanfeng composed himself and said, As for the specific matters of the alliance, Lord Yan Zhigui will be doing the negotiations. Court dismissed. After saying that, he hurriedly walked towards the back of the hall. He turned back to wave furiously at Qin Mu, beckoning him over. Qin Mu followed after him. When they arrived at the back of the palace hall, Emperor Yanfeng lifted his dragon robe and stamped his feet. So wealthy, Qin Mu hurriedly said. Soon to be poor. Emperor Yanfeng danced with raised hands while laughing. Imperial Preceptor is fighting a war in Supreme Emperor Heaven, and he has depleted my imperial treasury. Money is finally coming back now. Qin Mu was dumbfounded. Emperor must have gone crazy from being poor. I wonder if Heavenly Saint Cult has any money. Should we give him a cut of the profits? Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 640, Dim and Depressed. In the imperial palace, many of the palace maids had an emaciated look, and their clothing were also simple and plain. Some of these palace maids were plucking vegetables outside the imperial kitchen. Qin Mu saw this sight, and for a moment he thought he had walked into a market. Eternal Peace Empire was clearly very wealthy. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had paved 2 roads to connect West Earth to Middle Earth, and because of this, the trade was booming. Qin Mu saw that the people were leading abundant lives after the imperial court had built the 2 roads. However, the emperor and the palace were poor. The reason for their poor state was because the battle in Supreme Emperor Heaven has affected the imperial treasury. As a result, the treasury was emptied out. The battle in Supreme Emperor Heaven was like a bottomless pit. There was nothing to earn, and whenever they fought a war, all of the funds and provisions for the troops, including the spirit weapons, were all provided to them from Eternal Peace. Furthermore, the people of Supreme Emperor Heaven were also immigrating continuously into Eternal Peace, and it also required quite a significant sum to settle these people down. It was no wonder Emperor Yanfeng was beyond elated and lost his composure when he saw that he could earn a massive sum from allying themselves with the remnants of Crimson Light Era. Not long after, Yan Zhigui came forward and said, Your Majesty, I've already settled the emissary down. May I ask Your Majesty, how am I supposed to negotiate with the Crimson Light emissary? Emperor Yanfeng passed the list of items to Yan Zhigui. Negotiate according to the items in this list. I shall grant the remaining survivors of Crimson Light era a place to settle down here. Open up a trading port, establish traffic, flying ships and flying cars. Everything they need will be provided. Yan Zhigui looked at the list and he jumped in shock. He took a glance at Qin Mu and asked with a trembling voice, Lord Qin, this list is not a joke, right? Qin Mu replied, It's not a joke. Qi Shi will also accept the terms. These divine weapons aren't really of much use to the remaining survivors of Crimson Light era. They don't have that many people to use these items. Lord Yen just needs to remember one thing. They need our help, and it's not us that need them. Also, you must get hold of the divine ring of creation no matter what. Yan Zhigui left in a hurry. Emperor Yanfeng sighed ruefully. When the news of the battles in Supreme Emperor Heaven kept coming in during the early period, my blood was boiling, yet I was also scared and on edge. I wanted so much to personally be on the front lines to fight the enemies. After Imperial Preceptor arranged the cultivation method of Supreme Emperor Heaven, I have also comprehended it for quite some time and gained many benefits. However, I still regret that I can't personally go to the battlefield. As soon as Emperor Yanfeng finished speaking, a surprised voice cried out, The one that herds cows! Qin Mu looked towards the voice, and he cried out in shock, Sister Xiao, why have you returned back from Supreme Emperor Heaven? Ling Yuxiu ran over quickly as though she was flying. When she saw Emperor Yanfeng beside Qin Mu, she immediately slowed down her footsteps and walked with a solemn and dignified pose. Emperor Yanfeng said with a smile, There are no huge battles in Supreme Emperor Heaven recently, so Xiu'er is back. I still have some court affairs I have to settle, so I'll be taking my leave first. As he slowly walked away, he would turn back from time to time. When he saw Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu just standing there without any untoward actions, only then did he left with his mind at ease. When Ling Yuxiu saw him leaving out of the corner of her eye, she immediately grabbed Qin Mu's hand and pulled him forward while explaining with a smile, After my father became a god, he has become more and more awe-inspiring. He has become a little sneakier as well, and is most probably looking at us from a dark place now. Let's go to the Imperial Garden to shake him off. Qin Mu stumbled forward as he got pulled along by her. After passing through a few bends and winding corridors, they encountered a few Imperial concubines gathering together and taking a stroll. Ling Yuxiu immediately let go of Qin Mu's hand and greeted the Imperial concubines with a dignified bearing. When the Imperial concubines had left, she grabbed Qin Mu's hand again and ran forward happily. After running a few more steps, they encountered several palace maids escorting the Empress, and Ling Yuxiu jumped in shock. She immediately returned to her dignified look to greet the Empress. Mother! The Empress pulled her over and muttered something to her. She then examined Qin Mu up and down, and said with a smile, Cult Master Qin is becoming more and more handsome. Qin Mu felt that her gaze at him was slightly wrong, as though she was a mother-in-law that was looking at her son-in-law. He blushed and stood aside. After the Empress walked away, Ling Yuxiu pulled him once more to sprint forward, and they finally reached the Imperial Garden. She started chuckling. It's really uncomfortable to be staying in the palace. I'm always being restrained by all kinds of etiquettes, and I can't be myself. It's still better on the martial world. I can be free and happy. Qin Mu went to examine the exotic flowers and rare herbs. They were so beautiful that nothing more beautiful could be imagined. However, there were also numerous palace maids that were watering plants and getting rid of pests in some vegetable gardens, and it was because the Imperial Palace had no money, so they could only plant vegetables themselves. Sister Xiao, has Saintess Xiang also returned to eternal peace? Qin Mu asked her while admiring the scenery. Ling Yuxiu was furious. We haven't met for a long time, and instead of chatting with me, you're asking about her? How much do you miss her? Qin Mu hurriedly said, I'm looking for her because of proper business. I'm not missing her. She's back. Demoness Xiang has returned with me. Ling Yuxiu walked forward while puffing her cheeks in anger. Qin Mu quickly followed after her, and the two of them came in front of a flowering tree. The tree was not tall, and Qin Mu held onto a branch. He bent down to sniff the fragrance of one of its flowers, and a smile broke out on his face. He executed secrets of 3 primordial spirit assembly. Just as his nose was about to touch the petals, his primordial spirit had already left his body. When Ling Yuxiu looked at the side view of his clean and handsome face, she couldn't help feeling the fragrance of the flower being intoxicating at this moment. Her heart couldn't help beating faster. Her face blushed, and her breathing also became quicker. On the other side, Xianxia suddenly sensed something, and she hurriedly executed secrets of 3 primordial spirit assembly. As her primordial spirit left her body, she saw Qin Mu's primordial spirit arriving. Saintess Xiang, Princess Xiu and I are in the Imperial Garden, and things are urgent now, so I will keep things brief. The consciousness of Qin Mu's primordial spirit pulsed as he said, "The treasury of Eternal Peace Empire is empty. Does the sacred cult have any money?" Xianxia said with a smile. "You are dating that little vixen Yuxiu in the Imperial Garden, and yet you have come here to meet your mistress in private. This is truly the style of a devil cult master. The sacred cult has money, and buying half of eternal peace is no problem at all. Our sacred cult has properties all over the world, and every hall is flourishing. No matter if it's trading in Middle Earth or West Earth, mining ores, or forging spirit weapons, our sacred cult is participating in everything. That's why our wealth is flowing in endlessly." Qin Mu pondered for a moment and said, "Leave behind the daily expenses for the sacred cult and donate the rest of the money to the emperor. Let the emperor use it for his expenses." Xianxia immediately rejected, "No way! This money is all earned by our brothers and sisters of the sacred cult. Why should we give it to the emperor without reason?" Qin Mu said patiently, "There's a method to carry out commerce. Founding Heavenly Saint Cult isn't for the sake of earning money. It's for the everyday use of the common people, to let the people live better lives. The sacred cult carrying out commercial activities is to make the lives of the people more convenient, and it's not to hoard money. What you are earning is great abundance coins, so if Eternal Peace Empire no longer existed, the great abundance coins will have no use anymore. Now that the sacred cult has amassed half of the fortune in the world, disaster wouldn't be far." Xianxia was still reluctant. "We clearly earned the money through hard work. Money can cause wealth, and it can also cause disaster. As long as it benefits the people, it's okay. If it doesn't benefit the people, it's not okay. Heavenly Saint Cult isn't so powerful that we can rise above the heads of the people, to rise above the power of the empire. We aren't so powerful that we are invincible. When it was founded, Heavenly Saint Cult's original intention was the path of the saint, not to covet the fortune of the whole world." Xianxia was still slightly unwilling when an old woman walked towards their primordial spirits. She raised her head to look at them. "Xiang'er, the sacred cult master, is right. We take from the people, so we have to give back to them. Our C family may be managing the wealth of the sacred cult, but how the wealth of the sacred cult should be used is still the decision of the cult master. You have put too much importance on money, and have forgotten the heart of Heavenly Saint Cult." Qin Mu greeted the old woman at once. "C family's great-grandma." The old woman was flustered, but she returned his greeting and grinned. "Sacred cult master, Xiang'er may be a little greedy, but she isn't a miser." Qin Mu gave his thanks and said, "So, this is C family. I have intruded and alarmed great-grandma. Please pardon me. I'm still in the Imperial Garden, so I need to return as soon as possible." After saying that, he bowed and his primordial spirit vanished. Xianxia also quickly pulled back her primordial spirit and returned into her body. "Why does great-grandma want to give the wealth of the sacred cult to the emperor?" The great-grandma of C family said with a smile, "Cult master is right. The people are rich, the empire is weak, and only a selected few are strong. When outsiders invade and the empire is wiped out, the wealth of the people will cease to exist. No matter how much wealth one has, they would all turn into flowing water. The best route is still having rich people in a strong empire. As long as the empire doesn't fall, the wealth of the people can last long." In the Imperial Garden, Qin Mu's primordial spirit returned into his body. He saw Ling Yuxiu bending down in front of him, smelling the flower as well. There was only a flower between their faces. Ling Yuxiu opened her eyes secretly and blushed when she saw Qin Mu staring at her. Qin Mu suddenly let go of the branch and gave her a gentle kiss on her lips. Ling Yuxiu cried out in surprise and turned around to run. She parted the flowers, and her voice came from afar. "You hooligan! If my father knows about this, he will definitely take your head off." Qin Mu laughed loudly and chased after her. Behind a willow tree from a distance, Emperor Yanfeng had a dark face as he said to the little eunuch behind him, "Bring my little booklet over." The little eunuch hurriedly offered up the little booklet, brush, and ink. Emperor Yanfeng flipped open his little booklet and raised his brush. "Molesting my precious daughter, off with your head. I shall write it down first. Your Majesty, it's not good for us to be peeking from here, is it?" the little eunuch asked cautiously. Emperor Yanfeng stared at him. "Off with your head too. But not now, I'll write it down first." The little eunuch pouted his lips. "Your Majesty, my head has already been taken off over a dozen times." Qin Mu chased after Ling Yuxiu. The young man and young woman played for a moment and felt contented. Just as their feelings were growing stronger and they were about to do something, First Ancestor Human Emperor came over. Ling Yuxiu hurriedly retreated when she saw him coming. "She isn't a bad girl," First Ancestor Human Emperor said. Qin Mu jumped in shock. "You've seen everything. So has the Emperor. He's over there." First Ancestor Human Emperor pointed at the trees far away and said, "He has been following you too for quite a long time. The Empress is over there, hiding behind the fake mountain. I saw them just now, but they didn't notice me." Qin Mu broke out in a cold sweat as he looked at the trees. He saw the Emperor lifting his dragon robe and leaving quickly with a little eunuch. On the other side, the Empress and several palace maids were also moving away from the fake mountain in a hurry. First Ancestor Human Emperor looked at Qin Mu's distressed state, and he said with a smile, "You and I are both the same, throwing all of the responsibilities to others and not getting ourselves involved. Now that the negotiations with Qi have been handed over to the Emperor, we should be talking about proper business now. Do you want to learn my heaven and earth mudra? You have seen how strong it is, however, I could not find a successor. Only you can inherit my mudra skills." First Ancestor, "It's not that I don't want to learn. It's just that my frame of mind is different from yours." Qin Mu said righteously, "I don't have your experience, and I won't be able to learn your mudra skills." First Ancestor was speechless. He seemed to have suffered from a major setback, making him dispirited and listless. He had a dim and depressed expression, and seemed to have aged considerably. Qin Mu couldn't bear to see him like this. He said, "Why don't you teach it to me first? I'll learn it if I can. If I can't, I'll seek a worthy successor for you." First Ancestor's sorrow turned into delight, and he said with a smile, "Since you have the Overlord body, you will definitely be able to learn it. My technique is called Sacred Secrets of Heaven and Earth Heart. You will be the heart of heaven and earth, standing between them as they crumble. You will borrow the power of the falling heaven and rending earth, transforming into my heaven and earth mudra skills." He imparted his technique and mudra flawlessly to Qin Mu, and Qin Mu learned diligently. He memorized and comprehended First Ancestor Human Emperor's technique and mudra skills with unmatched precision. It was not inferior to Sakra scripture, and furthermore, there were even all kinds of knowledge and understanding of founding emperor era. However, this kind of technique brought along an intense imprint of that era. Qin Mu comprehended it, but he could never get the hang of it. First Ancestor Human Emperor was full of anticipation as he waited for Qin Mu to execute his mudra skills. However, after Qin Mu learned them, he continued to study the runes that were on the divine ring of creation. He tried to assemble the runes together to execute a creation divine art. Qin Mu decided to try it and threw out a mudra. A little palace maid that was just passing by yelped in surprise as she transformed into a little lamb. Qin Mu cried out in delight, "It's done! It's done!" First Ancestor Human Emperor was depressed. Qin Mu caught the little lamb and reversed the mudra skill to transform it back into the palace maid, who promptly left them in a flustered manner. Qin Mu took a glance at his expression, and he said with a smile, "First ancestor, I have already said that our frame of minds are different. I don't have that kind of mental state like yours, so I can't execute your Madras skills." First ancestor human emperor shook his head and turned to leave with a bleak expression. "How do you know if you never tried it before? I thought you and I are the same, orphans of Qin family, abandoned on this world." Boom! An explosion from a violent tremor suddenly came from behind him. First ancestor turned around and saw Qin Mu standing alone between heaven and earth, his body ready to fight against the looming disaster. First ancestor was stunned, and he revealed a look of anticipation. There's nothing an overlord body cannot learn. With one hand as heaven and another hand as earth, Qin Mu had a dim and depressed expression.